Welcome to another wonderful Hannah Miller audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Amish romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Hannah Miller, Amish romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Christmas Caregiver. Chapter 1. The buggy wheels crunched over the frozen Kansas ground as Elizabeth Beiler clutched her worn carpetbag tighter. November wind cut through her black wool cloak, carrying the scent of snow that would arrive before week's end. She pulled her capstring snug and studied the flat landscape stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It was nothing like the rolling hills of Lancaster County she'd left behind. Just up ahead now, called Henry Yoder from the driver's seat. Bishop Troyer's place is the white farmhouse with the red barn. Elizabeth's stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. After years and years of caring for aging parents, she was finally free to use her teaching gifts somewhere new. God had opened this door when the Kansas settlement wrote requesting a teacher. Surely this was his plan for her life. The farmhouse sat solid and prosperous against the gray sky. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Elizabeth could see movement through the windows. Henry helped her down from the buggy, and she smoothed her navy blue dress with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I can manage from here." Bishop Troyer answered her knock immediately, as if he'd been watching from the window. He was a tall man with graying beard and kind eyes that reminded Elizabeth of her late father. "Elizabeth, we've been expecting you." His voice carried an odd tension. "Please, come in from the cold." The front room was warm and simply furnished with plain wooden chairs and a braided rug. A young woman sat near the fireplace, her golden hair neatly pinned under a crisp white cap. She looked no more than 20, with bright blue eyes and a sweet smile. "This is my niece, Rebecca Troyer," the bishop said. "She arrived from Iowa last week." Elizabeth's heart began to sink as understanding dawned. The young woman rose gracefully and extended her hand. "Good to meet you, Elizabeth. I've heard wonderful things about your teaching experience." "Rebecca has been helping with the school children since she arrived," Bishop Troyer continued, his discomfort obvious. "The community, well, they felt it best to have someone from family take the position." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. She'd spent her meager savings on the train ticket west. She'd left everything familiar behind. And now... "I see." Elizabeth fought to keep her voice steady. Of course. Family first. Please, sit." The bishop gestured toward a chair. "We know this is unexpected. Unfortunate. But perhaps God has other plans." Elizabeth perched on the edge of the wooden chair, her mind racing. Other plans? She was 30 years old, had nowhere to go, no money for train fare home, and winter approaching fast. "There is another possibility," Bishop Troyer said slowly. "Amos Mast has been asking for help with his children. His wife died 2 years past, and he's been managing alone." "What kind of help?" Elizabeth asked. "Daily care. Cooking, cleaning, watching the little ones. His daughter Mary is 6 and won't speak to strangers. Son Samuel is 10 and getting into mischief. The baby, Rebecca, is nearly 2 but sickly since birth." Elizabeth's heart tugged at the mention of children in need. She'd always longed for little ones of her own. "Amos is a good man," the bishop continued. "Hard-working farmer, faithful to the church. But he needs help, especially with winter coming." "Where would I stay?" Elizabeth asked. "The Yoders have an empty dotty house on their property. It's small and needs some repairs, but it would provide shelter." Sandra Troyer leaned forward with genuine concern. "I'm sorry about the teaching position, Elizabeth. I know you traveled far." The girl's kindness made Elizabeth's throat tighten. This wasn't Sandra's fault. The community had chosen family. "It's God's will," Elizabeth managed. Perhaps caring for children is where he wants me. Bishop Troyer nodded approvingly. Shall I take you to meet Amos? He's expecting you this afternoon. Elizabeth stood and gathered her belongings. What choice did she have? Please. The Mast farm sat a half-mile down the dirt road, surrounded by bare cornfields stubbled from harvest. The two-story white house needed paint, and the yard showed signs of neglect. A red barn dominated the property, its roof slightly sagging on one end. As their buggy pulled into the yard, the front door opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Elizabeth's breath caught. Amos Mast was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair and broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work. His beard was full but neatly trimmed, marking him as a married man, though she knew he was widowed. Amos, Bishop Troyer called. This is Elizabeth Beiler. Amos approached the buggy, his gray eyes assessing but not unkind. Good afternoon, Elizabeth Beiler. Thank you for coming. His voice was deep and measured. Elizabeth stepped down from the buggy, suddenly aware of the wisps of chestnut hair escaping her cap. I understand you need help with your children, she said directly. 3 of them, and winter coming. He glanced toward the house. Would you like to meet them? They walked up the porch steps, past a broken rocking chair and scattered toys. Inside, the house felt cold despite the wood stove burning in the front room. Dishes sat unwashed in the kitchen sink, and children's clothes hung over chair backs to dry. Mary! Samuel! Amos called. Come meet Miss Beiler. A boy with his father's dark hair came running from the kitchen, his face smudged with something sticky. Behind him trailed a small girl with blonde braids, who immediately hid behind Amos's legs when she saw Elizabeth. This is Samuel, Amos said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. And Mary here is shy around new people. Elizabeth knelt to Mary's eye level, keeping her distance. Hello, Mary. I like your pretty blue dress. The child peeked out from behind her father but didn't speak. She hasn't talked to anyone outside the family since her mom died, Amos explained quietly. A crying sound came from upstairs, and Amos sighed. That's Rebecca. She's been fussy all day. May I? Elizabeth asked, gesturing toward the stairs. Amos nodded, and Elizabeth climbed to the second floor. The baby's room was tidy but sparse, with a simple wooden crib and rocking chair. Rebecca stood gripping the crib rails, her face red from crying. She was small for nearly 2 years, with wispy brown hair and her father's gray eyes. Oh, little one, Elizabeth murmured, lifting the child. What's troubling you? Rebecca's crying quieted as Elizabeth settled into the rocking chair and began humming an old hymn her own mother had sung. The baby's head grew heavy against Elizabeth's shoulder. When she came back downstairs with Rebecca sleeping in her arms, she found Amos watching from the doorway with an expression she couldn't read. She settled right down for you, he said softly. Sometimes they just need a bit of something different. Bishop Troyer cleared his throat. Amos, shall we discuss the arrangements? The men moved to the kitchen while Elizabeth remained in the front room with the children. Samuel had pulled out a wooden puzzle and was working on it with intense concentration. Mary sat on a braided rug, playing quietly with a cornhusk doll. This house needed a woman's touch, Elizabeth realized. Not just cleaning and cooking, but warmth and laughter and the kind of daily care that turned a house into a home. Miss Beiler? Amos had returned. If you're willing, I can offer room and board plus a small wage. The work would be daily care for the children, meals, and household tasks. What about the Dottie house Bishop Troyer mentioned? It's on the property near the Yoders, about a quarter-mile walk from here. You'd have privacy but be close enough to come early and stay late as needed. Elizabeth looked at the 3 children who would be in her care. Samuel was bright and energetic but clearly missing a mother's presence. Mary needed someone to coax her back into the world. And little Rebecca required the constant attention only a mother could provide. I accept, she said firmly. Relief crossed Amos's face. We can start tomorrow if that suits you. I'll show you the Dottie house now so you can see what you're getting into. The small house sat behind the main Yoder farmstead, connected by a worn path through bare oak trees. It was indeed tiny, just 2 rooms with a small kitchen area and a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and dresser. The roof showed water stains, and gaps around the windows would let in winter cold. I know it's not much, Amos said apologetically. But it's shelter, and you'd have your own place. Elizabeth walked through the rooms, mentally cataloging what needed attention. It will do nicely with some fixing up. I can help with repairs, he offered. It ain't used much. In truth, sometimes the Yoders use it. I told them I'd see to what needs done during evenings after farm work and that you'd be living here. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. His gray eyes held genuine concern, and she realized he was as desperate for help as she was for a place to belong. Thank you, she said. I'll make it comfortable. As they walked back toward the main road where Bishop Troyer waited with the buggy, Elizabeth felt the first snowflakes touch her cheek. Winter was coming fast to Kansas, but for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she felt hope stirring in her chest. Maybe God did have other plans for her after all. Chapter 2. Elizabeth woke before dawn in the narrow bed, her breath visible in the frigid air of the Dottie house. She'd spent a restless first night listening to wind whistle through gaps in the walls and mentally preparing for her first full day with the Mast children. The small alarm clock on the dresser showed 5:30. Time to start the fire and prepare for the day ahead. She dressed quickly in her warmest navy dress and thick woolen stockings, then coaxed life into the old wood stove. The previous tenant had left a small supply of split oak, but Elizabeth could see she'd need to ask about getting more wood soon. While the stove began throwing heat, she braided her chestnut hair and pinned it securely under her cap. The walk to the Mast farm in the pre-dawn darkness felt longer than the 1/4 of a mile it actually was. Frost crunched under her feet, and she pulled her black cloak tighter against the bitter November wind. Smoke was already rising from the farmhouse chimney, telling her Amos was up tending his livestock. Elizabeth let herself in through the kitchen door as they'd arranged. The room was warmer than her own little house, but dishes from last night's supper still cluttered the table and sink. Baby Rebecca's crying drifted down from upstairs, and she could hear Samuel's voice from one of the bedrooms, though she couldn't make out his words. She hung her cloak on a peg by the door and immediately went to work. First, she climbed the stairs to tend to Rebecca, who was standing in her crib with tears streaming down her small face. The child's diaper was soaked through, and her nightgown was damp as well. "Oh, poor little one," Elizabeth murmured, lifting the baby. "Let's get you clean and dry." She found fresh clothes in the simple wooden dresser and changed Rebecca efficiently, talking softly to her all the while. The baby's crying subsided to hiccups, then stopped altogether as Elizabeth held her close. "Elizabeth!" Samuel's voice called from down the hall. "I know you're here. I heard ya. Mary won't get up." Elizabeth carried Rebecca toward the children's bedroom, where she found Samuel fully dressed in his dark trousers, white shirt, and suspenders, ready for school. He was trying to pull blankets off a small lump in the other bed. "Good morning, Samuel," Elizabeth said calmly. "Let your sister wake up at her own pace." "But she'll be late for school," Samuel protested. "Teacher Sandra don't like when we're late." Elizabeth felt a pang at hearing the young woman's name, but she pushed it aside. "How long does it take you to walk to school?" 20 minutes if we hurry. 15 if we run." "And what time does school start?" 8 o'clock. Elizabeth checked the small clock on the dresser. It was just past 6:30. "Then we have plenty of time. Why don't you come help me start breakfast while Mary finishes sleeping?" Samuel brightened at being given a grown-up task. He followed Elizabeth downstairs, chattering about his school lessons as she settled Rebecca in a high wooden chair with some wooden spoons to bang together. "I'm real good at arithmetic," Samuel said proudly. "But Teacher Sandra makes us practice reading every day, and some of the words are hard." "Reading takes practice," Elizabeth agreed, pulling eggs and milk from the icebox. "What's your favorite subject?" "I like when we learn about farming and animals." Teacher Sandra knows lots about chickens, but not so much about horses. I know lots about horses 'cause Dad lets me help with them. He's out in the barn right now. Elizabeth smiled as she began mixing pancake batter. Samuel reminded her of her younger brother at that age, full of energy and eager to share everything he knew. Does Mary like school? Elizabeth asked casually. Samuel's face grew serious. She don't talk there neither. Teacher Sandra tries to get her to answer questions, but Mary just looks down at her hands. Some of the other children think she's strange. Elizabeth's heart ached for the silent little girl upstairs. People aren't strange, Samuel. Sometimes they just need more time to feel safe. Dad says Mary used to talk all the time before Ma'am went to heaven. She even sang songs and told silly stories when she was little. The kitchen door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the sound of stamping feet. Amos entered, his dark hair tousled from morning chores and his hands red with cold. Good morning, he said, hanging his coat and hat on pegs. Smells wonderful in here. Dad, Samuel called. Elizabeth is making pancakes, and she's gonna help Mary not be scared of school. I didn't say that exactly, Elizabeth said quickly, flipping pancakes on the griddle. But I hope Mary will feel more comfortable with time. Amos washed his hands at the kitchen sink and dried them on a towel. Mary's always been sensitive, but since Sarah died. He trailed off, then seemed to realize he'd never mentioned his wife's name to Elizabeth. My wife Sarah. She had a way with Mary, understood her gentle nature. I'd like to know all about your children, Elizabeth said, piling golden pancakes on a plate. What they like, what troubles them. It will help me care for them better. Amos settled into a chair at the kitchen table, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. He looked at his son and smiled. Samuel's the easy one. He's curious about everything, sometimes too curious. Last week he took apart the kitchen faucet to see how it worked. I see he got it back together, Elizabeth said with a chuckle, bringing pancakes and syrup to the table. Eventually. With considerable help from his dad. Amos smiled, the first genuine smile Elizabeth had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less burdened. He's smart as a whip but gets bored easy. Sarah used to give him extra projects to keep his hands busy. Elizabeth served pancakes to Samuel, who dug in hungrily. Rebecca banged her spoons against the high-chair tray, demanding attention, so Elizabeth broke up small pieces of pancake for her to eat with her fingers. Mary's different, Amos continued, his voice growing thoughtful. She feels things deeply. Sarah said she's like a little sponge, soaking up everyone else's emotions. When Sarah was happy, Mary laughed. When Sarah was tired, Mary got quiet and worried. And when Sarah passed, Mary retreated inside herself, Elizabeth said softly. Jaw. She stopped talking to anyone but family within a week of the funeral. Won't answer questions at school, won't play with the other children. She still talks to me and Samuel at home, but barely above a whisper. Elizabeth heard soft footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Mary descending slowly, still in her white nightgown with her blonde hair hanging loose around her shoulders. The child's gray eyes, so like her father's, surveyed the kitchen scene cautiously. Good morning, Mary, Elizabeth said gently. Are you hungry for pancakes? Mary nodded but didn't speak. She climbed onto the chair next to Samuel and accepted the plate Elizabeth offered her. Mary, you need to get dressed for school, Amos said. You can eat after you're ready. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head vigorously. She don't like getting dressed, Samuel explained helpfully. She used to have Ma'am help her upstairs. Elizabeth understood. Would you like me to come help you choose a dress for school? She asked Mary. Mary studied Elizabeth's face for a long moment, then nodded slightly. If your dad agrees, you can finish your breakfast first, Elizabeth said. We have time. Thank you, Amos agreed. If she has help, there will be time. While Mary ate, Elizabeth observed the family dynamics. Samuel chattered constantly, filling any silence with questions or observations. Amos listened patiently and answered thoughtfully, but she could see the weariness in his eyes. Rebecca demanded frequent attention, dropping food and babbling with a few coherent words, but many more in her baby language. It struck Elizabeth how much work it took to manage 3 children, especially when one required extra patience and understanding. No wonder Amos looked exhausted. "Elizabeth," Samuel said suddenly, "do you know how to make lebkuchen? Gingerbread cookies?" "Ja, my ma'am taught me her recipe." "Why do you ask?" "Ma'am always made them for Christmas. Last year Dad tried, but they turned hard as rocks." Samuel giggled, and even Mary smiled slightly at the memory. Elizabeth glanced at Amos, who looked embarrassed. "Cooking ain't my strongest skill," he admitted. "Christmas is still quite a ways away," Elizabeth said diplomatically. "Perhaps we can make some together when the time comes." After breakfast, Elizabeth helped Mary upstairs to choose clothes for school. The bedroom was tidy but austere, with just 2 beds, a dresser, and a small chair. Elizabeth noticed there were no dolls or toys visible, though she remembered seeing Mary playing with a cornhusk doll the day before. Mary went to the dresser and pulled out a dark blue dress, then looked at Elizabeth questioningly. "That's a perfect choice," Elizabeth said. She helped Mary dress and braid her hair, working gently and talking softly about small things, the color of the dress, how the braid felt smooth, how nice it was to have warm clothes on a cold morning. Mary didn't respond verbally, but Elizabeth could feel her relaxing. "There," Elizabeth said, tying the braid back and putting a scarf over her head. "You look ready to go." Mary touched the scarf and smiled, the first real smile Elizabeth had seen from her. Downstairs, Samuel was bouncing impatiently by the door with his school books. "Come on, Mary. We're gonna be late." "No, you're not," Elizabeth said, checking the clock. "You have 15 minutes to spare." She helped both children into their winter coats. As they prepared to leave, Mary hung back, looking uncertain. "Will you?" Mary's voice was so quiet Elizabeth had to lean down to hear her. "Will you be here when I get home?" Elizabeth's throat tightened at the whispered question. She was touched that Mary had chosen to speak with her. She had assumed it was going to take many days before she chose to do so, if ever. "Ja, Mary. I'll be right here waiting for you." Mary nodded and slipped her small hand into Samuel's. Elizabeth watched from the kitchen window as the 2 children walked down the lane toward the schoolhouse, Samuel's chatter visible in the puffs of vapor from his mouth, Mary walking quietly beside him. "She spoke to you," Amos said from behind her. "That's the first time she's talked to someone outside the family in nearly 2 years." Elizabeth turned to find him standing close enough that she caught the scent of soap and cold morning air clinging to his clothes. "I hope she senses already that I care about her." "Sarah had that gift too," he said quietly. "The ability to make anyone feel safe and understood." There was something in his voice when he mentioned his wife's name, not just grief, but guilt and regret layered beneath it. Elizabeth wondered what burdens Amos carried beyond simple widowhood. "Tell me about Sarah," she said impulsively. "It might help me understand the children better." Amos was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. "Sarah was sunshine," he said finally. "She could walk into a room and make everyone smile just by being there. She loved the children fiercely, loved being a mother more than anything else in the world." He paused, staring out the window toward the empty fields. "She wanted more babies. Always talked about having a house full of children. When she got pregnant with Rebecca, she was so happy." His voice grew thick. "But something went wrong during the birth. She fought for 3 days before." Elizabeth saw his hands clench on the table. "It wasn't anyone's fault," she said softly. "Wasn't it?" Amos looked at her with pain-filled eyes. "I'm the one who wanted to wait for the doctor instead of just using the midwife like we had with the other 2. I'm the one who insisted we could manage the birth at home when complications started. If I'd gotten her to town sooner." "You made the best decisions you could with the knowledge you had," Elizabeth said firmly. "Second-guessing won't bring her back or change what happened." "Maybe not." But it doesn't stop the questions from coming in the middle of the night. Elizabeth understood guilt intimately. She carried her own burden of what-ifs about her parents' final illnesses. Grief makes us think we had more control than we actually did. It's easier to blame ourselves than accept that some things are simply God's will. Amos studied her face. You sound like you know something about loss. I spent the last 8 years watching my parents decline and die. I questioned every decision, wondered if I'd done enough, been good enough, tried hard enough. Eventually, I realized that guilt was just another form of pride, thinking I could have changed God's plan if I'd been smarter or better. Baby Rebecca chose that moment to throw her remaining pancake on the floor and bang her spoons demandingly. The mood broke, and both adults turned their attention to the messy, cheerful child. I was told she was a bit sickly. But I must say, she looks quite strong this morning, Elizabeth observed, wiping Rebecca's face with a damp cloth. Was she very sickly as a baby? Born too early and too small, Amos said. The doctor wasn't sure she'd live through the first winter. She's gained weight this year, but she's still behind other children her age. Elizabeth lifted Rebecca from the high chair and settled her on her hip. The baby immediately grabbed for Elizabeth's cap strings, babbling happily. She seems quite alert and curious, Elizabeth said. Sometimes children just need extra time to grow into themselves. That's what Sarah would have said, Amos murmured, then seemed surprised he'd spoken the words aloud. Elizabeth felt an unexpected pang at the comparison. Would she always be measured against the beloved wife whose shoes she wasn't even trying to fill? The rest of the morning passed in domestic routine, washing dishes, tidying the house, tending Rebecca, and starting preparations for the midday meal. Elizabeth found herself settling into the rhythm of the household, learning where things belonged and how the family probably liked things done. When the school children returned at noon for dinner, Elizabeth was surprised and asked if they always returned home for lunch. It turned out that the children who lived close enough to school went home to eat. The others brought their lunches. Of course, she should have guessed they'd be home, for they hadn't taken any lunches. How had she forgotten to even ask about it? She was glad she had soup simmering and fresh bread cooling on the counter. Sometimes we take a lunch, though, Samuel announced. Mary immediately sought Elizabeth's side. Well, how was school so far today? Elizabeth asked, ladling soup into bowls. Teacher Sandra taught us about the Pilgrims, Samuel reported. And she said we might do a Christmas program this year if enough parents help. Elizabeth glanced at Mary, who was eating her soup silently. Did you learn about pilgrims too, Mary? Mary nodded but didn't elaborate. Samuel, oblivious to his sister's reticence, continued chattering about his morning lessons while Elizabeth listened, and Rebecca played with wooden blocks on the floor. When lunchtime was over and the children prepared to return to school, Elizabeth realized how quickly she was growing attached to this little family. There was something healing about caring for others who were healthy after so many years of nursing the dying. Here, she was helping lives grow and flourish rather than simply easing suffering. But she also sensed undercurrents she didn't yet understand: the weight of grief that still pressed on Amos's shoulders, Mary's fragile trust, Samuel's need for guidance, Rebecca's dependency. They were all wounded in different ways, and Elizabeth wondered if she had the strength and wisdom to help heal them all. As she waved goodbye to the school children and settled Rebecca for her afternoon nap, Elizabeth offered a quiet prayer for wisdom and patience. Whatever God's plan for her in Kansas might be, she was determined to serve this family with all her heart. Chapter 3. The second week of November brought colder temperatures and Elizabeth's first real test of Kansas winter. She woke each morning to frost thick on the Dottie house windows and had to break a thin layer of ice on the water basin before washing her face. The small gaps around the windows let in drafts that made the small rooms perpetually chilly, no matter how much wood she fed the stove. Still, she bundled up each morning before dawn and made the familiar walk to the Mast farmhouse. The routine was becoming natural now: start coffee for Amos, tend to Rebecca's morning needs, coax Mary through getting dressed, and keep Samuel from bouncing off the walls while breakfast cooked. Elizabeth, Samuel announced one morning over his pancakes, Teacher Sandra says you used to teach school back in Pennsylvania. Ja, I did. Elizabeth poured syrup for Mary, who whispered thank you so quietly that likely only Elizabeth heard it. How come you ain't teaching here instead of her? Elizabeth glanced at Amos, who was listening while feeding Rebecca small bites of pancake. Sometimes God has different plans than what we expect. I think he wanted me to take care of you and Mary and Rebecca instead. Samuel considered this seriously. Maybe. But I bet you know more stories than Teacher Sandra. She only knows boring ones about pilgrims and such. Samuel, Amos warned gently. Teacher Sandra is doing her best. I know, Dat. But Miss Elizabeth could tell us stories while we walked to school, couldn't she? Elizabeth felt a flutter of pleasure at Samuel's confidence in her. I suppose I could share a story or two. Could you walk with us this morning? Samuel's eyes lit up with hope. It's awful boring with just Mary, and she never talks much anyway. Mary's face flushed red, and she hunched over her plate. Elizabeth saw tears gathering in the little girl's eyes. Mary's good company even when she's quiet, Elizabeth said firmly. Some people think better when they're not chattering all the time. She caught Mary's grateful glance and smiled. But I would enjoy walking with you both this morning. Let me get Rebecca bundled up, and we can all go together. The walk to the one-room schoolhouse took them past 3 other Amish farms and through a grove of oak trees that had lost all their leaves. Elizabeth carried Rebecca while Samuel peppered her with questions about Pennsylvania and whether the farms there were different from Kansas ones. Mary walked close to Elizabeth's other side, occasionally reaching out to touch Rebecca's mittened hand. The baby was enchanted by the outdoors, pointing at everything and babbling in her own language. See that big oak tree, Rebecca? Elizabeth pointed to an ancient tree whose trunk would take 3 people holding hands to circle. That tree was probably here before your gross Dottie was even born. Rebecca clapped her hands and said something that sounded like tree, making all of them laugh. As they approached the schoolhouse, Elizabeth could see other children arriving with their lunch pails and books. A few parents lingered, visiting with each other before heading home. She recognized Henry Yoder, whose farm bordered the Dottie house where she was staying. Good morning, Elizabeth, Henry called. How are you settling in? Very well, thank you. Though I fear I'll need more firewood before long. We can help you with that. I'll have my boys bring a load over this afternoon, Henry promised. Can't have you freezing in that old house. Thank you, I'd appreciate it. I'll be seeing you later, Henry said. He touched the brim of his felt hat in farewell and wandered off. Samuel ran ahead to join a group of boys his age, but Mary hung back, clinging to Elizabeth's free hand. You don't have to stay with me, Elizabeth murmured to her. I'll be right here when school lets out. Mary nodded but still seemed reluctant to let go. Elizabeth knelt, shifting Rebecca to her other arm. Would you like to help me with something special today? She asked quietly. I was thinking of making soup for dinner, and I could use someone to help me choose which vegetables to use. Mary's face brightened, and she nodded eagerly. Then you'd better pay attention in school so you can tell me what you learned while we cook. Mary finally released Elizabeth's hand and walked into the schoolhouse, looking back twice to make sure Elizabeth was still watching. The school building was simple but well-maintained, with rows of wooden desks and a large stove in the center. Through the windows, Elizabeth could see Sandra Troyer at the front of the room, her golden hair neat under her white cap, writing something on the slate board. A pang of longing hit Elizabeth unexpectedly. This should have been her classroom, her students, her chance to finally use the teaching gifts she'd cultivated for so long. Instead, she was the hired help, caring for someone else's children while the young bishop's niece lived her dream. Foolish thinking, she murmured to herself, bouncing Rebecca to keep her happy. God's plan is perfect, even when I don't understand it. The walk back to the farm gave Elizabeth time to think. Rebecca dozed against her shoulder, lulled by the steady rhythm of walking. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying scents of wood smoke and the promise of snow. She began to understand the Mast family's rhythms and needs more and more. Samuel craved attention and mental stimulation. He was bright enough to be bored by routine schoolwork but young enough to need guidance channeling his energy. Mary needed patience and gentle encouragement to rebuild her confidence. And Rebecca, despite her small size, was a happy baby who thrived on affection and routine. But what about Amos? Elizabeth found herself thinking about him more than was probably proper. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but she sensed deep loneliness beneath his quiet exterior. Sometimes she caught him watching his children with an expression of such profound sadness that it made her chest ache. Back at the farmhouse, Elizabeth settled Rebecca for her morning nap and began planning the day's tasks. The house needed thorough cleaning, floors swept and mopped, furniture dusted, windows washed if the weather stayed clear. Laundry waited in baskets, and she'd noticed several items that needed mending. She was elbow-deep in dishwashing when she heard the kitchen door open. Expecting Amos returning from morning chores, she turned with a welcoming smile. Instead, she found herself face-to-face with a young woman she didn't recognize. The visitor was perhaps 22, with dark hair neatly arranged under her cap and a dress of deep green wool that brought out her brown eyes. She was pretty in the way that would make folks look twice, with smooth skin and a confident bearing. "Good morning," the woman said, looking Elizabeth up and down with undisguised curiosity. "I'm Anna Schrock. You must be the hired woman Amos found." The way she said hired woman made Elizabeth bristle, but she kept her voice even. "I'm Elizabeth Beiler. I care for the children." I heard." Anna moved further into the kitchen, removing her heavy cloak. "I thought I should come meet you, see how things are going." Elizabeth dried her hands on her apron. "Things are going well, thank you. The children are adjusting nicely." Anna's gaze swept the clean kitchen, the folded laundry, the preparations for dinner already started. "I see you're keeping busy." There was something in her tone that Elizabeth couldn't quite identify, not exactly disapproval, but not approval either. More like assessment. "The children need routine and attention," Elizabeth said carefully. "I try to provide both." "Of course." Anna settled uninvited into one of the kitchen chairs. "I'm sure you're doing your best. It must be quite different from teaching school as you had expected to do." So, she knew about the teaching position. Elizabeth wondered how much the community was discussing her situation. Different, but rewarding in its own way. "I imagine it's temporary, though. Until Amos finds a proper wife to care for his family." The words hit Elizabeth like cold water. Of course. Anna wasn't just a curious neighbor, she was a potential bride making sure the hired help knew her place. "I serve where God places me," Elizabeth replied evenly. Anna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "As we all do." "Speaking of which, Amos and I have been getting to know each other better lately. I think my parents have been discussing possibilities. They do own the largest acreage in these parts." Was the girl bragging? "I see." Elizabeth turned back to the dishes, hoping her face didn't show how her stomach had suddenly dropped. "Nothing formal yet, of course. These things take time. But it's important for a man with children to remarry quickly, don't you think? Children need a mother's influence. They need love and stability," Elizabeth said. "That can come from many sources. For sure and for certain. But there's no substitute for a real mother." Anna's voice carried a hint of steel beneath the sweet tone. "Someone who belongs to the family permanently, not just temporarily." Before Elizabeth could respond, Rebecca's crying came from upstairs. She dried her hands quickly. "Excuse me. The baby is waking." She climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, Anna's words echoing in her mind. A real mother. Someone who belongs permanently. The implication was clear. Elizabeth was just a placeholder until Anna Schrock could step into her hopeful role as Amos's wife and the children's mother. Rebecca was standing in her crib, tears streaming down her small face. Elizabeth lifted her, checking her diaper and feeling her forehead to see if it was hot, for she seemed distressed. "What's wrong, little one? Bad dreams?" Rebecca buried her face against Elizabeth's shoulder and gradually stopped crying. Elizabeth walked to the window, bouncing her gently and looking out at the bare fields stretching toward the horizon. How foolish she was being to allow herself to become so attached to this family. Of course, Amos would remarry. He was young, hardworking, and from a good family. Anna Schrock would be a logical choice. She was young enough to give him plenty more children, and pretty enough to make him happy. She was also from a likely prominent family that would strengthen his position in the community. Elizabeth was just the spinster hired to mind the children until a real wife could take over. When she came back downstairs with Rebecca, she found Anna examining the mending basket. "My, you do keep busy," Anna said. "Though I noticed that Samuel's torn his good shirt again. That boy needs a firmer hand." "He's very active," Elizabeth said neutrally. "Indeed. Boys need strong discipline, or they grow up wild." Anna set down the shirt. "Well, I should be going. Please tell Amos I stopped by. We're planning to attend the Troyer barn raising on Saturday together." After Anna left, Elizabeth felt deflated and uncertain. She'd been so focused on caring for the children and making herself useful that she'd forgotten she was only temporarily needed. Once Amos married Anna, if he married her, there would be no place for her in this household. The thought of leaving Samuel, Mary, and Rebecca made her throat tighten. In just 2 weeks, they'd become precious to her. But what right did she have to feel possessive of children who weren't hers? She was still wrestling with these thoughts when Amos came in for the noon meal, stamping snow off his boots and bringing the smell of cold air and barn work with him. "How are things this morning?" he asked, washing his hands at the pump. "Fine." Anna Schrock stopped by to introduce herself. Something shifted in Amos's expression. "Did she?" That was thoughtful of her. "She mentioned you're attending the Troyer barn raising together." "The community expects." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Anna's a good woman. Her family has been kind to us since Sarah died." Elizabeth busied herself ladling potato soup into bowls, not trusting her voice. What had she expected him to say? That he wasn't interested in remarrying? That he preferred his hired help to the eligible young woman everyone expected him to court? When the children returned for noon meal, the kitchen filled with noise and activity that pushed Elizabeth's dark thoughts aside. Samuel chattered about his arithmetic lessons while Mary quietly ate her soup and occasionally whispered something to Elizabeth about the vegetables she would help choose later. "Elizabeth," Samuel said suddenly, "are you coming to Sunday preaching service this week? If your dad doesn't mind me riding along in the buggy." "Course not," Amos said. "You're part of the household." "But for how long?" Elizabeth wondered. That afternoon, while Rebecca napped and the older children were back at school, Elizabeth tackled the rest of the mending with unusual intensity. Keeping her hands busy helped quiet her churning thoughts. She was patching a tear in Samuel's pants when Amos appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I was over at the Yoders earlier. Henry Yoder's boys brought firewood for the Dottie house," he said. "I helped them stack it behind the house." "Thank you. I was getting worried about staying warm." Amos lingered, as if wanting to say something more. Finally, he spoke. "Elizabeth, about Anna Schrock's visit. I hope she didn't say anything to make you uncomfortable." Elizabeth looked up from her mending. She was perfectly polite. Just neighborly. Anna can be direct in her opinions sometimes. She cares about you and the children. That's natural. Amos studied her face. "What did she say to you?" Elizabeth considered how to answer. "She mentioned that you might be making arrangements soon." "For courting?" Amos's jaw tightened. "The community has expectations. A widowed man with children should remarry quickly. Anna's family has made their interest clear." "And you?" The question slipped out before Elizabeth could stop it. Embarrassment flooded her, and she looked down at her hands, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. Amos was quiet for a long moment. "I want my children to be happy and cared for. I want to do what's right for the family and the community." It wasn't really an answer, Elizabeth realized. It was the response of a man doing what was expected of him. "Of course," she said softly. "The children's welfare must come first." "Elizabeth." He stepped closer, and now, looking up, she could see conflict in his gray eyes. "I want you to know that whatever happens, you'll always have a place here as long as you want it. The children have grown attached to you, and you've brought some order to this house that's been missing since Sarah died." The kindness in his voice almost undid her. "That's generous of you, but I understand how these things work. When you marry, your wife will want to run her own household. I wouldn't want to interfere with that. You could never be an interference. You're—" He seemed to struggle for words. "You're a gift to this family." Before Elizabeth could respond, they heard Samuel's voice calling from outside, and the spell was broken. Amos stepped back, the moment of intimacy passing as quickly as it had come. But as Elizabeth watched him go to greet his children, she carried his words in her heart. "You're a gift to this family." Even if her time here was limited, she would treasure that assurance. That evening, as she sat in the cold Dotty house mending clothes by lamplight, Elizabeth made peace with her situation. She would love these children and serve this family for as long as she was needed. When the time came to step aside for Anna Schrock or whatever other young woman, she would do so gracefully. But until then, she would make every day count. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, covering the Kansas landscape in a blanket of pristine white. Winter was coming, bringing with it changes Elizabeth couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 4. The first serious snowfall arrived 3 days later, blanketing the Kansas landscape in 6 inches of heavy, wet snow that made the morning walk to the Mast farm treacherous. Elizabeth wrapped her heaviest shawl over her winter cloak and picked her way carefully along the path, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. Inside the Dotty house, the temperature had dropped so low overnight that she'd found ice in the water pitcher beside her bed. The gaps around the windows had let in snow that melted into puddles on the rough wooden floor. She'd spent precious firewood all night trying to keep the small rooms warm enough to sleep. She needed to remind Amos that he'd said he would do some repairs. She took a deep breath. She needed to be more comfortable asking for help. Perhaps this was one of the lessons God was teaching her. When she reached the Mast farmhouse, she was grateful for its solid warmth. Amos was already up, tending the kitchen fire and preparing coffee. He looked up with concern when she entered, stamping snow from her boots. "You're half frozen," he observed, noting her red cheeks and hands. "That Dotty house isn't fit for this weather." "I managed," Elizabeth said, though her teeth were still chattering slightly. "The fire kept me warm enough." Amos frowned. "You shouldn't have to burn wood all night just to keep from freezing. I'll come look at the windows today, see what can be done to seal them better." "You have enough work with other repairs," Elizabeth protested. "I can stuff rags in the gaps." "Rags won't help when the real cold comes," Amos said firmly. "This is just a taste of Kansas winter. I'm sorry that I haven't come sooner. I feel right bad about it." Rebecca's crying interrupted their conversation, and Elizabeth hurried upstairs to tend to the baby. She found Rebecca standing in her crib, shivering in her thin nightgown. The upstairs rooms were always colder than the kitchen, but today they felt nearly as frigid as outdoors. "Oh, poor little one," Elizabeth murmured, lifting the child and wrapping her in a thick quilt. "Let's get you warm and dry." As she changed Rebecca's diaper and dressed her in warmer clothes, Elizabeth noticed the baby's nose was running, and she felt slightly warm to the touch. Not feverish, but definitely fighting off the cold that had settled into the house. Downstairs, she found Samuel dressed for school but looking glum. "Do we still have to go to school in the snow?" he asked hopefully. "The snow isn't that deep," Elizabeth replied, settling Rebecca in her high chair with a cup of warm milk. "But we'll bundle you up extra warm." "Mary don't like walking in snow," Samuel reported. "Her boots ain't good, and her feet get wet." Elizabeth glanced at Amos, who looked embarrassed. "I keep meaning to take her to town for new boots, but with harvest and preparing for winter." "May I look at them?" Elizabeth asked gently. "Sometimes boots can be patched if they're not too worn." Mary appeared at the bottom of the stairs, dressed but moving slowly. Her small face was pale, and Elizabeth noticed she was favoring her right foot. "Good morning, Mary," Elizabeth said warmly. "Come and let me see your boots." Mary approached shyly and lifted her foot to show a worn black boot with a hole near the sole. Elizabeth examined it carefully. "The leather is still good," she said. "I think I can patch this with some heavy thread and a piece of oiled cloth. It won't be perfect, but it should keep your foot dry." Mary smiled hopefully and whispered, "Thank you." "Thank you, Elizabeth," Amos said. He sighed. "I don't seem able to keep up with it all myself." "I'm so glad you're here." Elizabeth smiled. "It's a lot for one person," she said softly. While breakfast cooked, Elizabeth worked on Mary's boot, using materials from her sewing basket to create a temporary repair. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the snow out. "There," she said, helping Mary put the boot back on. "How does that feel?" Mary took a few experimental steps and nodded approvingly. "Elizabeth can fix anything," Samuel declared, digging into his pancakes. "Yesterday she mended my torn shirt so good you can't even see where it ripped." "Elizabeth is very skilled with her needle," Amos agreed, and Elizabeth felt warmth spread through her chest at his praise. The walk to school was challenging, with Samuel and Mary struggling through snow that came up to their knees in places. Elizabeth carried Rebecca, who was fascinated by the white landscape and kept trying to lean down from Elizabeth's arms and grab handfuls of snow. "Stay on the packed-down parts," Elizabeth instructed, following the path other families had made. "And hold hands so no one falls." At the schoolhouse, she noticed several other children had arrived with wet feet and red cheeks. Sandra Troyer stood on the front steps, looking young and overwhelmed as she tried to manage the chaos of snowy boots and damp mittens. "Perhaps I should help her get the children settled," Elizabeth murmured, then caught herself. It wasn't her place to interfere with the young teacher who had taken her position. Instead, she made sure Samuel and Mary were safely inside before beginning the trek back to the farm with Rebecca, who had begun coughing during the walk. By the time they reached the farmhouse, Rebecca's cough had worsened, and her cheeks were flushed with what Elizabeth now recognized as fever. She carried the baby straight upstairs to change her and felt her forehead with growing concern. "Amos," she called down the stairs. "I think Rebecca is getting sick." Amos appeared immediately, taking the stairs two at a time. Elizabeth had laid Rebecca on her bed and was removing her damp outer clothes. "She felt warm this morning, but I thought it was just from sleeping under heavy quilts," Elizabeth explained. "Now she has a cough and definite fever." Amos placed his large, work-roughened hand on his daughter's forehead and frowned. "She's always been susceptible to chest complaints. Last winter she had an awful cold twice." "Should we send for the doctor?" Elizabeth asked, concerned by the worry in his voice. "Dr. Mitchell lives in town, a good distance away. In this snow, it would take a good while to reach him, and longer for him to get here. The roads haven't been cleared yet." Amos looked torn. "Maybe if she gets worse." Elizabeth understood. Country families often had to manage illnesses on their own, especially in bad weather. She'd nursed her parents through many sicknesses without medical help. "I know some remedies that might be useful," she offered. "My mom taught me to treat chest colds with steam and herbal teas." "What do you need?" "Sage and thyme if you have them, honey, and a large pot for making steam." While Amos went to find the herbs, Elizabeth made Rebecca comfortable in her crib with extra blankets. The baby was listless now, her usual cheerful babbling replaced by fretful whimpering. They spent the morning creating steam treatments and trying to get Rebecca to drink warm herbal tea. Elizabeth held the baby while Amos held a blanket to create a tent over a pot of steaming water infused with sage. "Breathe the warm air, little one," Elizabeth murmured, rocking gently. "It will help your chest feel better." Working together so closely, Elizabeth became aware of Amos in ways that made her uncomfortable. The way he moved with quiet competence, the gentleness of his large hands when he touched his daughter, the concern that creased his brow as he watched Rebecca fuss. "You're good with sick children," he said quietly as they took a break from the steam treatment. "Experience with your parents mostly?" jaw, and younger cousins when I was growing up. Sickness comes to every family. Elizabeth adjusted Rebecca's blanket. But children often recover faster than we expect. Sarah always said that too. Amos paused, then continued. The night Rebecca was born, when we realized Sarah wasn't getting better, she made me promise to take special care of the baby. She said Rebecca would need extra love because she'd never know her ma'am. Elizabeth's throat tightened. You've kept that promise. All your children know they're loved. Have I, though? Amos looked down at his hands. Sometimes I wonder if they're just surviving instead of thriving. Samuel acts out at times because he misses his mother's attention. Mary has withdrawn so far, I fear she'll never find her way back. And Rebecca. He touched the baby's cheek. She's so small, so fragile. What if I'm not enough for them? You're their dad, Elizabeth said firmly. That will always be enough, even when it doesn't feel like it. Before Amos could respond, they heard voices outside and the sound of a buggy in the yard. That sounds like Anna, Amos said, moving to the window. And her mother. I can't believe they made it here in the snow. Elizabeth's stomach clenched. The last thing she wanted was to face Anna Schrock while she was alone in the house with Amos tending his sick child like a worried mother. I'll go greet them, Amos said, clearly reluctant to leave Rebecca. Maybe you should stay with Rebecca, Elizabeth suggested. I can explain that she's ill and this isn't a good time for visiting. Amos looked grateful. Would you? Anna doesn't always understand when things need to be postponed. Elizabeth smoothed her apron and went downstairs to answer the knock. Anna stood on the porch with an older woman who shared her dark hair and confident bearing, obviously her mother, Mrs. Schrock. Good morning, Elizabeth said politely. I'm afraid this isn't a good time for visiting. The baby is quite ill. Anna's eyebrows rose. Ill? What's wrong with her? Chest cold with fever. We're trying to keep her comfortable. Mrs. Schrock pushed forward. Where's Amos? Surely, he should be handling this, not leaving it to. She looked Elizabeth up and down disapprovingly. The hired help. Amos is with Rebecca now, Elizabeth said evenly. I'm helping with her care. Well, we certainly can't have a sick baby in the house, Anna declared. Mother and I will come back another time. But Mrs. Schrock wasn't ready to leave. It seems you've settled in quite well. The words were innocent enough, but the sentiment behind them left Elizabeth feeling affronted. Caring for the children is why I'm here. That includes when they're ill. Anna could handle the nursing, Mrs. Schrock continued. She has experience with sick children from caring for her younger siblings. I'm managing well enough, Elizabeth replied, then immediately regretted the defensive tone in her voice. Anna smiled coldly. Of course, you are. But it does seem unusual for a man to rely so heavily on, well, you, for such important family matters. The implication was clear, true family should be handling this crisis, not the hired woman. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn but kept her voice level. As I said, this isn't a good time for visiting. Perhaps you could return when Rebecca is feeling better. After they left, Elizabeth stood in the kitchen taking deep breaths to calm herself. She didn't like their inferences. And what choice did she have? The baby needed care, and Amos couldn't manage everything alone. When she returned upstairs, she found Amos holding Rebecca while she dozed fitfully against his shoulder. How did that go? He asked quietly. They were concerned about Rebecca, Elizabeth said diplomatically. Amos studied her face. Anna wasn't happy about you handling the nursing, was she? Elizabeth hesitated, then decided on honesty. I am not sure. I think Anna would rather do it. Truly? Amos's voice carried an edge Elizabeth had never heard before. I've never known her to be long on compassion. He shuddered. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I'm a bit on edge. That's understandable. Amos was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he looked directly at Elizabeth. Rebecca is my daughter, and this is my house. I decide who cares for my children, not Anna Schrock or her mother. The firmness in his voice sent warmth through Elizabeth's chest, but she also heard the frustration underneath. Anna's expectations were creating tension, and Elizabeth hated being the cause of it. The rest of the day passed in focused attention on Rebecca, whose fever peaked in the afternoon before finally beginning to break. By evening, she was breathing easier and had managed to drink some broth. When Samuel and Mary returned from school, they were full of concern for their baby sister and eager to help. Elizabeth showed Mary how to sing softly to Rebecca while Samuel fetched cool cloths for the baby's forehead. "Is Rebecca gonna be okay?" Samuel asked anxiously. She's already getting better," Elizabeth assured him. "By tomorrow she should be feeling much stronger." Mary whispered something to Samuel, who leaned down to hear. "She wants to know if you'll stay until Rebecca is completely well." Elizabeth's heart clenched. "Of course I will. I won't leave while any of you need me." That evening, after the children were asleep and Amos had finished his chores, he found Elizabeth in the kitchen cleaning up the day's accumulation of dishes and medicine preparations. "You should go rest," he said. "You've been caring for Rebecca all day." "I want to check on her once more before I leave," Elizabeth replied. "And tomorrow I'll come early in case she has a difficult night." Elizabeth. Amos moved closer, and she could see exhaustion in his eyes. What Anna implied. "You've done exactly what any caring person would do for a sick child." "Thank you for saying so." "You're not just a hired woman to this family," Amos said quietly. You're someone we depend on. Someone we trust. Someone we..." He paused, seeming to search for words. "Someone we care about." Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken at the intensity in his voice. "I care about all of you, too. More than I probably should." "Why shouldn't you?" Amos stepped closer still, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Caring isn't wrong, Elizabeth. It's what makes life worth living. And my children, well, they're easy to care about." For a moment, they stood in the warm kitchen with only the soft sound of the fire crackling. Elizabeth felt something shift between them, a recognition of feelings that had been building for weeks. Then Amos stepped back, reality returning. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. I didn't get your windows seen to yet. Do you want to stay here for the night?" There was nothing she wanted more, but it would be completely inappropriate. Tongues would wag for sure and for certain. "I'm fine. I'll be going." She could see by his expression that he knew why she turned him down. He sighed. "All right. If you're sure." Elizabeth nodded, not trusting her voice. As she bundled up for the cold walk to the Dottie house, she replayed his words. "You're someone we care about." Had he meant the family collectively, or something more personal? Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold was fierce. As she hurried along the path, Elizabeth wondered how much longer she could continue living in the drafty little house as winter deepened. But more than that, she wondered how much longer she could continue caring for Amos's children while fighting her growing feelings for him. Each day brought them closer together, but each day also brought him closer to an expected connection with Anna Schrock. Somehow, it was expected, and she knew Amos was a man who would follow the expected course. Back in her cold little house, Elizabeth banked the fire, put an additional quilt on her bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Rebecca's illness had shown her how deeply she'd become attached to this family and how much it would hurt when the time came to let them go. Chapter 5. Rebecca's recovery took nearly a week, during which Elizabeth spent most of her time at the Mast farmhouse. She arrived before dawn and stayed past sunset, nursing the baby through restless hours and worried days. By the time Thanksgiving approached, Rebecca was finally back to her cheerful self, but Elizabeth was exhausted from the constant care and the daily struggle with her increasingly cold living quarters. Amos had patched the windows, which had helped considerably, but still, the frigid air seemed to creep in. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Elizabeth woke to find ice coating the inside of the Dottie house windows and her breath visible in the frigid air. The firewood Henry Yoder's boys had delivered was running dangerously low, despite her careful rationing. She dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and hurried through the pre-dawn darkness to the Mast farm, grateful for its welcoming warmth. "God in heaven, you're near frozen," Amos said when she entered the kitchen, her cheeks red with cold and her hands too stiff to remove her mittens properly. "How cold was it in that house last night?" "Your patching job around the windows has helped," Elizabeth said, holding her hands near the kitchen stove. "But it is good to be here." Amos frowned deeply. "You can't keep staying there in this weather. It's not safe." Before Elizabeth could protest, Rebecca toddled into the kitchen, fully recovered and babbling happily. She went straight to Elizabeth with outstretched arms, wanting to be picked up for their morning cuddle. "There's my sweet girl," Elizabeth murmured, lifting the baby and feeling Rebecca's warm cheek against hers. "Feeling all better now?" "Bessa," Rebecca declared, one of her clearest words, making Elizabeth laugh. Samuel appeared next, already dressed for school but moving slowly. "Elizabeth, do we get tomorrow and Friday off for Thanksgiving?" "Ja, you do. For days to rest and be thankful." "Are you thankful for anything this year?" Samuel asked, settling at the table for breakfast. Elizabeth considered the question while she ladled oatmeal into bowls. 2 months ago, she'd been a spinster facing an uncertain future. Now she was caring for 3 precious children who had become dear to her heart, living in a community that was beginning to feel like home, and working for a man whose quiet kindness touched something deep in her soul. "I'm thankful for all of you," she said simply. "For the chance to be part of your family, even if only temporarily." Mary appeared at the bottom of the stairs, dressed but looking troubled. She approached Elizabeth and tugged on her skirt, then whispered something. Elizabeth bent down to hear. "I already know she wonders if you'll spend Thanksgiving with us," Samuel said, sure of what her sister would be saying. "She's worried you'll be alone in that cold house." Elizabeth glanced at Amos, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "I wouldn't want to intrude on family time." "You wouldn't be intruding," Amos said firmly. "Mary's right to worry. You shouldn't be alone on Thanksgiving. Besides, I kind of just figured you'd be with us." "But won't Anna and her family be joining you?" Elizabeth asked, remembering conversations she'd overheard about traditional holiday gatherings. Something shifted in Amos's expression. "The Schrocks have their own family dinner to host. I wasn't planning anything elaborate here." Elizabeth felt a flutter of hope, then immediately chided herself. "It was just a practical invitation, nothing more. If you're certain I wouldn't be imposing, I'd be grateful to spend the day here. I could help with the cooking." "It's settled then," Amos said. "Though I warn you, I don't have much experience with fancy holiday meals." "We don't need fancy," Elizabeth said, bouncing Rebecca on her hip. "Just family together is enough." The word family hung in the air, and Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't family, she was the hired help. But when she looked at the children's happy faces, it was easy to pretend otherwise. That evening, after the children were in bed, Amos stopped her before she left. "I have some extra blankets and quilts," he said. "And enough firewood to keep you warm tonight." "Thank you, but you don't need to." "Elizabeth." His voice was gentle but firm. "You've been caring for my family for weeks, including nursing Rebecca through her illness. The least I can do is make sure you don't freeze to death in return." "But who will stay with the children?" she asked. "I can leave Samuel in charge. He's still awake. I'm only going to be gone a very short time. Just quick enough to get you home and back." Once at her Dottie house, Amos moved efficiently around the small house, adding wood to the fire, spreading extra quilts on her bed, and checking the windows for new gaps that might be letting in cold air. "This house isn't suitable for winter," he said, examining a loose window frame. "I feared it was true, and it is true for sure and for certain." "It's shelter," Elizabeth said. "I've managed in worse conditions." Amos turned to study her face in the lamplight. "Have you?" What was your life like in Pennsylvania before you came here? Elizabeth settled into the room's single chair, suddenly feeling the weight of her exhaustion. My parents were elderly when I was born. By the time I was 20, they needed constant care. My father had a weak heart, and my mother's mind began to wander. I spent the last 8 years nursing them through various ailments until they both passed. You gave up your youth to care for them, Amos said quietly, leaning against the bedroom doorframe. I did what needed doing. They were good parents who deserved care in their old age. Elizabeth twisted her hands in her lap. But sometimes I wondered what it would be like to have my own family to care for instead of watching others decline toward death. Is that why you became a teacher? To have children in your life? Partly. I love learning, and I wanted to share that with young minds. But being around children filled something in me that was empty. Amos was quiet for a moment. You filled something empty in my children too. Samuel is more settled, Mary is beginning to trust again, and Rebecca lights up every time you walk into a room. They're easy children to love, Elizabeth said softly. Even when Samuel takes apart the kitchen pump or Mary won't speak to strangers or Rebecca cries half the night with fever? Elizabeth smiled. Especially then. Children need us most when they're being difficult, don't you think? Sarah used to say the same thing. Amos's voice didn't hold the same pain she used to hear when he mentioned his wife's name, just gentle memory. She said love wasn't about perfection, but about showing up every day regardless of circumstances. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. But she's been gone 2 years, and life has to continue for the sake of the children. He looked directly at Elizabeth. I'm grateful God sent you to us when He did. The intensity in his voice made Elizabeth's heart skip. I'm grateful He brought me here, too. They were in comfortable silence for a moment, the crackling fire creating a warm cocoon around them. Elizabeth was acutely aware of Amos's presence, the way he filled the small space with his solid strength, the kindness in his eyes, the gentleness of his hands when he tucked the extra quilts around her bed. I should let you rest, Amos said finally, rising. Tomorrow we'll be busy with Thanksgiving preparations. And I must be getting back home. Amos? Elizabeth called as he reached the door. What does your family usually do for Thanksgiving dinner? I want to make sure I prepare foods the children will enjoy. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans if we have them preserved. Sarah always made pumpkin pie, but I've never attempted one. He paused. Nothing fancy. Just filling. I can make pie, Elizabeth offered. My ma'am taught me her recipe. And perhaps we could have some special treats for the children? Maybe molasses cookies? Amos's face brightened. They would love that. Samuel's been asking about cookies since you mentioned making lebkuchen for Christmas. After he left, Elizabeth lay under the pile of warm quilts thinking about the day ahead. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she would spend a holiday as part of a family rather than alone. The thought filled her with anticipation and a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the extra blankets. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering everything in crystalline beauty. Elizabeth woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks, thanks to Amos's extra quilts and firewood. She dressed carefully in her best navy dress and took special care with her hair, telling herself it was just proper respect for the holiday. At the Mast farmhouse, she found the children already awake and excited about the special day. Samuel bounced around the kitchen asking when they could eat pie, while Mary helped set the table with their best dishes. Rebecca toddled between them all, chattering and getting underfoot. Good morning, Amos said, coming in from morning chores with color in his cheeks from the cold air. The children have been up since before dawn, asking when you would arrive. Well, I'm here now, and we have cooking to do, Elizabeth said, tying on her apron. Samuel, would you like to help me make cookie dough? The morning passed in happy activity. Elizabeth taught Samuel how to measure molasses and spices while Mary watched with fascination. Rebecca helped by playing with wooden spoons and occasionally getting small tastes of cookie dough. Amos stayed close, helping with tasks like lifting heavy pots and reaching high shelves, but mostly just clearly enjoying the atmosphere of warmth and activity that had been missing from his house for too long. "It smells like Christmas in here," he said, breathing in the scents of cinnamon and molasses. "Wait until we make the lebkuchen," Elizabeth replied, rolling out cookie dough. "Then it will really smell like Christmas." "But it ain't Christmas," Samuel piped up, and they all laughed. "Will you teach me to make lebkuchen?" Mary asked suddenly, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Elizabeth's heart leaped at hearing Mary's voice used so confidently. "Of course, I will. We can make them together next week." The chicken roasted slowly in the oven while they prepared other dishes. Elizabeth made her mother's recipe for mashed potatoes with cream and butter, seasoned green beans with bacon, and fresh bread that filled the kitchen with yeasty warmth. "I feel like I should be helping more," Amos said, watching Elizabeth orchestrate the meal preparation with easy competence. "You are helping," Elizabeth assured him. "You're keeping the children entertained and the fire going and making sure I have everything I need." "That's exactly what I need from you." By mid-afternoon, the kitchen table was laden with more food than the family had seen at one meal since Sarah's death. The children's eyes were wide with wonder at the abundance. "Should we say a special prayer?" Samuel asked. "Since it's Thanksgiving?" Amos nodded, and they all joined hands around the table. Elizabeth felt a jolt when Amos's large, work-roughened hand enveloped hers on one side while Mary's small fingers gripped the other. "God, we thank you for this food, for this day, and for bringing us together as a family," Amos prayed. "We thank you for health, for provision, and for the gift of caring for each other. Bless this meal and our time together. Amen." "Amen," Elizabeth whispered, her throat tight with emotion. The meal was a joyous affair. Samuel talked constantly about everything he was thankful for, including Elizabeth's cookies and the way she fixes Mary's boots and how she makes Rebecca laugh. Mary ate quietly but with obvious pleasure, occasionally whispering comments to Elizabeth about the food. Rebecca made a glorious mess with her mashed potatoes but seemed delighted with the festive atmosphere. "This is the best Thanksgiving dinner we've had since Mam died," Samuel declared, reaching for his third molasses cookie. Mary nodded vigorously in agreement, and even Rebecca clapped her hands and shouted more. Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes at their happiness. "I'm so glad. You've made me feel like part of the family." "You are part of the family," Samuel said matter-of-factly. "Ain't she, Dat?" Amos looked across the table at Elizabeth, his gray eyes warm with an emotion she didn't dare name. "Ja," he said quietly. "Ja, she is." After dinner, they sat in the front room while the children played with simple wooden toys. Elizabeth worked on mending while the fire crackled cheerfully, creating a scene of domestic contentment that felt almost too good to be real. "Elizabeth," Amos said quietly while the children were absorbed in their play, "I've been thinking about your living situation." Elizabeth's hands stilled on her sewing. "What about it?" "The Dottie house isn't safe in this cold. I'd like you to consider moving into the spare room upstairs, at least until spring. I can talk to the bishop about it." Elizabeth's heart began to race. "But I couldn't. It wouldn't be proper for an unmarried woman to live in the house with you and the children." "People might talk," Amos acknowledged. "But they'll talk more if you freeze to death in that little house. The children need you, Elizabeth." "I need..." He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "We all need you healthy and safe." "What would Anna say?" Elizabeth asked quietly. Amos's jaw tightened. "Anna doesn't make decisions about my household yet." Elizabeth set down her mending and looked at him directly. "But she expects to, doesn't she? Eventually?" Amos was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. "The community expects me to marry her. Anna's family has made their interest clear." But what?" "But I find myself caring more about what you think than what Anna expects." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that neither dared to fully acknowledge. Elizabeth's heart hammered in her chest. "Amos," she said softly. You know I care about you and the children. But I also know my place. I'm here to help until you find a suitable wife. I don't want to complicate that for you. What if I want to make my own decision? Amos asked quietly. What if I want someone who already loves my children as her own? Someone who brings peace and joy to my house? Someone who's 30 years old and a spinster? Elizabeth finished for him. Someone the community sees as old who took charity work when she couldn't have the teaching position? Someone who has more kindness and wisdom in her little finger than most people have in their whole bodies, Amos countered firmly. Someone my children adore and trust. Someone who makes me remember what it feels like to hope for the future instead of just surviving each day. Elizabeth stared at him, her heart full of longing and fear in equal measure. Amos, you can't mean. I mean that I've fallen in love with you, Elizabeth Beiler, he said quietly. Completely and thoroughly in love with you. Before Elizabeth could respond, Samuel's voice piped up from across the room. Are you and Dad gonna get married, Elizabeth? 'Cause that would be really good. Heat flooded Elizabeth's cheeks as she realized the children had been listening. Mary was watching with hopeful eyes, and even Rebecca seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Samuel, Amos said gently. Some conversations are private. But I want Elizabeth to be our ma'am, Samuel said earnestly. She already takes care of us like a ma'am, and she makes the house happy again. Mary nodded vigorously and whispered something to Samuel, who translated, Mary says she wants Elizabeth to stay forever and ever. Elizabeth looked around at the three children who had become so precious to her, then at Amos, whose eyes held a question and a hope that made her breath catch. She began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. I need to think. This is all so sudden. Of course, Amos said quickly. I didn't mean to pressure you. I wanted you to know how I feel. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of confused emotions for Elizabeth. The children treated her declaration of need to think as a mere formality, chattering excitedly about having her as their new mother. Amos was quietly attentive but gave her space to process. When it was time for her to return to the Dotty house, Amos insisted they all walk her home despite her protests. About what I said earlier, he began as they reached her door. I meant every word, but I don't want you to feel pressured. Take all the time you need to decide what's right for you. But, she began to protest, feeling suddenly unworthy. Elizabeth. Amos stepped closer, his voice tender. I have 3 beautiful children. What I don't have is someone to share the joy of raising them. Someone to love and be loved by. Someone to grow old with while we watch our children become adults. The community won't understand. They expect you to marry Anna. Let me worry about the community. My concern is what will make my children happy and what will make me happy. Right now, that looks like you. Later, inside her cold little house, Elizabeth sat wrapped in quilts and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Amos loved her. He wanted to marry her. The children wanted her to be their mother. But was it fair to step into the place everyone expected Anna Schrock to fill? Was it wise to trust that love could have happened so quickly? As she finally drifted off to sleep, Elizabeth carried one thought above all others. For the first time in her life, she had been chosen not out of duty or necessity, but out of love. Whether or not she was brave enough to accept that gift remained to be seen. Chapter 6. The first Sunday in December brought Elizabeth face to face with the reality of Amos's declaration. As she sat in the Miller's meeting room during preaching service, she could feel eyes upon her, curious glances from women who whispered behind their hands, knowing looks from men who nodded toward Amos, and pointed stares from Anna Schrock, whose usually sweet expression had hardened into something resembling barely controlled anger. Elizabeth tried to focus on the preaching, but her mind kept wandering to the conversation she and Amos had shared 3 days earlier. Since Thanksgiving, he had been carefully respectful, giving her space to think while still maintaining the warm partnership that had developed between them. The children, however, had shown no such restraint. Samuel asked daily when she was going to become their new ma'am, while Mary had begun clinging to her with renewed intensity, as if afraid Elizabeth might disappear if she let go. After the service ended and the meal was served, Elizabeth found herself cornered by Mrs. Schrock and two other prominent women from the community. "Elizabeth," Mrs. Schrock began with false sweetness, "we've been discussing the Christmas program for the children. Perhaps you could share some ideas, given your teaching background." Elizabeth recognized the trap immediately. Whatever she suggested would likely be criticized or dismissed, but refusing to participate would mark her as uncooperative. "I'm sure Teacher Sandra has everything well planned," Elizabeth replied diplomatically. "Indeed, she does," said Mrs. Fisher. "Though some of us wondered if perhaps you might feel displaced watching someone else guide the children's education." "Not at all. I'm content with my current position." Caring for the Mast children," Mrs. Schrock said with emphasis. "Though one wonders how long such arrangements typically last." Her meaning was clear: she would be delighted when Elizabeth's help was no longer needed. Elizabeth kept her expression neutral despite the sting of the words. "I serve where God places me, for as long as He wills." Mrs. Schrock's smile sharpened. "Of course. Though sometimes we must be careful not to mistake our own desires for divine guidance." Before Elizabeth could respond, she felt a presence beside her and looked up to see Amos approaching with Rebecca in his arms and the older children trailing behind. "Elizabeth," he said warmly, "are you ready to head home? Rebecca is getting fussy, and I think she needs her afternoon nap." "Of course." Elizabeth rose quickly, grateful for the rescue. As they gathered their things to leave, she noticed Anna Schrock watching from across the room with an expression that made Elizabeth's stomach knot with worry. The buggy ride home was quiet, with Samuel and Mary dozing against each other and Rebecca sleeping in Elizabeth's arms. Amos seemed lost in thought, his jaw set in the way that indicated he was wrestling with something difficult. "The women were giving you a hard time," he said finally. "Nothing I can't handle." "You shouldn't have to handle it. Anna's mother has been spreading talk about you overstepping your position." His hands tightened on the reins. "I should speak with Bishop Troyer about it." "Nay," Elizabeth said quickly. "That would only make things worse. Let people talk, eventually they'll find something else to occupy their attention. Not if Anna keeps stirring the pot." Amos glanced at her. "She cornered me after service, wanting to know when we're going to announce our engagement." Elizabeth's heart sank. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That no engagement exists between us and none is planned. Truth is, we didn't even truly court." "How did she take that?" "About as well as you'd expect. She reminded me that her father had spoken with the bishop about it, and that the community expects—" He trailed off with a frustrated sigh. "Expects you to do your duty," Elizabeth finished quietly. "My duty is to my children and my own conscience, not to community expectations." They reached the farm as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the snow-covered fields. Elizabeth helped get the children settled inside while Amos tended to the horse and buggy. "Elizabeth," Samuel said as she helped him out of his good Sunday clothes, "why was that lady giving you mean looks in church?" Elizabeth paused, enfolding his small shirt. "What lady?" "Anna. She kept staring at you like you'd done something bad." So even the children had noticed the tension. Elizabeth chose her words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about things. It doesn't mean anyone is bad. But you're not going away, are you?" Mary murmured, her gray eyes wide with worry. "Even if Anna is mad at you?" Elizabeth knelt to Mary's level and took her small hands. "I'm not planning to go anywhere right now. But Mary, you know that situations can change, and sometimes people have to make difficult choices." "Dad said you might become our new ma'am," Mary said, her voice growing a bit louder. "Samuel told me you were thinking about it." Elizabeth's throat tightened. How could she explain the complexities of the situation to a 6-year-old who had already lost one mother? "Your dad and I are talking about many things," she said carefully. "But whatever happens, I want you to know that I love you very much, and that will never change." Mary threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck and held on tightly. I love you, too. I want you to stay forever. That evening, after the children were in bed, Elizabeth sat in the kitchen working on a new project, small Christmas gifts for each of the children. She was embroidering a handkerchief for Mary with tiny flowers around the border, carving a whistle for Samuel from a piece of maple wood, although her skills were lacking in that direction, and she was sewing a soft cloth doll for Rebecca. Amos entered from checking on the livestock, bringing the smell of the outside with him. The children settled, he asked, washing his hands at the pump. Jaw. Though Mary was asking questions about us. Amos dried his hands and turned to face her. What kind of questions? Whether I was going away. Whether you and I might. Elizabeth fumbled for words. She's worried about losing another mother figure. And what did you tell her? That I love her, and that won't change regardless of what else happens. Amos sat across from her at the table, watching her careful stitches on the handkerchief. You're making Christmas gifts. The children should have something special to open Christmas morning. What about their dad? Do I get something special too? Elizabeth looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. That depends. On what? On whether you've done all your chores this year. Amos smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile she'd seen from him all day. I've tried to do my chores and even be good. Though I may have shocked a few people by falling in love with my children's caregiver. Elizabeth felt heat rise in her cheeks. Amos. I know you're still thinking. I'm not trying to pressure you. But Elizabeth, I need you to understand something. He leaned forward, his gray eyes serious. These past weeks, watching you with my children, seeing how you've brought joy back to this house, it's shown me what I want my future to look like. What if your future disappoints people who care about you? The people who truly care about me want me to be happy. The people who just want me to meet their expectations. He shrugged. Their disappointment isn't my burden to carry. Elizabeth set down her needlework and looked at him directly. Everyone expects you to marry Anna. Your bishop expects it. Anna herself expects it. Are you prepared for the consequences of disappointing all of them? Are you prepared for the consequences of making me happy instead? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Elizabeth thought of Anna's cold stares, Mrs. Schrock's pointed comments, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. I've never been the kind of woman who inspires strong feelings in men, she said quietly. I've always been the sensible girl, the helpful one, the one people turn to when they need something done. I don't know how to be chosen for love. Amos reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Then let me show you. His touch sent warmth up her arm and straight to her heart. For a moment, Elizabeth let herself imagine what it would be like to be cherished, to be the center of someone's world instead of just a useful addition to it. The children would be so happy, she said softly. They would. But what about you, Elizabeth? Would you be happy? Before she could answer, they heard a buggy in the yard and voices calling Amos's name. He frowned and went to the window. It's my brother David and his wife. Something must be wrong for them to come calling so late. David and Martha Mast entered with worried expressions, stamping snow from their boots and looking around the warm kitchen with obvious relief. God be praised, you're both here, David said, nodding to Elizabeth before turning to his brother. We need to talk. What's happened? Amos asked, helping Martha with her cloak. Anna Schrock came to see us this evening, Martha said, glancing uncomfortably at Elizabeth. She's upset about something. Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. Perhaps I should go. Nay, Amos said firmly. Whatever Anna said concerns all of us. What did she tell you, David? David looked deeply uncomfortable. She says you've been leading her on for months, making her believe you intended to court her properly. She claims you've been using Elizabeth's presence to avoid making a commitment. That's not true, Amos said flatly. She also says Elizabeth has been overstepping her position. acting like the lady of the house, making decisions about the children that should be left to family. Elizabeth felt heat flood her face. I've only tried to care for the children properly. Martha spoke up gently. I know that, Elizabeth. But Anna is spreading stories that you've been encouraging Samuel to call you ma'am, that you've been making promises to Mary about staying permanently. I never encouraged Samuel to call me anything inappropriate, Elizabeth said, her voice tight with hurt. And I've been careful not to make promises I can't keep. But children hear what they want to hear sometimes, David said diplomatically. Anna says Samuel told his teacher that you were going to marry his dad and be their new ma'am. Amos ran a hand through his hair. Samuel says many things. That doesn't mean Elizabeth encouraged him. I know that. But Anna is stirring up talk in the community. She's got her mother and several other women convinced that Elizabeth is trying to trap you into marriage by using your children's affections. The words hit Elizabeth like physical blows. Trap him? I would never. Of course you wouldn't, Martha said quickly. But you know how gossip spreads. Anna is making it sound like you calculated the whole thing, losing the teaching position, taking work here, making yourself indispensable to the children. Elizabeth stood abruptly, her hands shaking. I should go. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Elizabeth, wait. Amos caught her arm gently. Don't let Anna's jealousy drive you away. Jealousy? David raised his eyebrows. So, there is something between you two? Amos looked directly at his brother. I love Elizabeth. I want to marry her. And yes, Anna is jealous because she expected me to propose to her by now. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Martha and David exchanged meaningful glances. Amos, David said carefully, you know I want you to be happy. But you must understand how this looks to the community. Anna's family has been expecting an announcement for months. Anna's family made assumptions without consulting me. Even so, you've been seen with her publicly, and that allowed people to believe you were courting. Now suddenly you're in love with your children's caregiver. David shook his head. It doesn't look good. Elizabeth pulled her arm free from Amos's gentle grip. He's right. I won't be the cause of scandal for this family. There's no scandal, Amos said firmly. Two unmarried adults falling in love isn't scandalous. It is when one of them was expected to marry someone else, Martha said gently. Amos, we're not saying you can't choose Elizabeth. But you need to understand the cost. What cost? Amos asked, though Elizabeth could see from his expression that he already knew. Anna's father is one of the most influential men in the community, David explained. If you humiliate his daughter publicly, there could be consequences. Business relationships might suffer. Your children might face difficulties. Elizabeth felt the walls closing in around her. I won't be responsible for harming the children in any way. You wouldn't be, Amos said desperately. Elizabeth, please don't let fear make this decision for you. But Elizabeth was already moving toward her cloak. I need time to think. Alone. It's too cold for you to stay in the Dottie house tonight, Martha said with genuine concern. Come home with us. You can stay in our spare room. Elizabeth looked around the warm kitchen that had become so dear to her, then at Amos's stricken face. Thank you. That's very kind. As she gathered her few belongings, Samuel appeared at the top of the stairs in his nightshirt. Elizabeth? Where are you going? Elizabeth's throat closed with unshed tears. I'm going to stay with your uncle and auntie tonight. But why? Did I do something wrong? Nay, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. I need to think about some things. Samuel patted down the stairs and wrapped his arms around her waist. Don't think too long, okay? We need you here. Elizabeth kissed the top of his head, breathing in his little boy scent of soap and sleep. Be a good boy for your dad. As David helped her into their buggy, Elizabeth looked back at the farmhouse windows glowing golden in the darkness. Amos stood on the porch watching them leave, his tall figure silhouetted against the light. She was falling in love with him too, had been for weeks, if she was honest. But was love enough to weather the storm that Anna Schrock was determined to unleash? And more importantly, was her happiness worth the potential cost to the children she'd grown to love as her own? The questions followed her into the cold December night, offering no easy answers. Chapter 7. Elizabeth spent 3 restless days at David and Martha's house, helping with their household tasks while wrestling with her conflicted heart. Martha was kindness itself, offering gentle conversation without prying, while David remained diplomatically neutral about the situation between his brother and Anna Schrock. But Elizabeth could see the worry in both their faces. They loved Amos and wanted his happiness, yet they also understood the practical realities of community life. On the 4th morning, Elizabeth woke to find the world transformed again by a heavy snowfall that had continued through the night. Drifts piled against the windows, and the wind howled with a ferocity that made the house shudder. "Dear God," Martha said, peering out at the white landscape. "I've never seen it come down so hard so early in the season." David shook his head as he pulled on his heaviest coat. "I need to check on the livestock, but I'm worried about getting to the barn and back." Elizabeth felt a spike of anxiety. "What about the children? Amos will need help managing them on a day like this." "The roads are impassable," David said. "No one's going anywhere until this storm passes." By afternoon, the snow had stopped but left behind huge drifts. David managed to dig a path to the barn, but the lane to the main road remained completely blocked. "We could be stuck here for days," Martha said, ladling soup into bowls for their midday meal. "I hope Amos has enough food stored for him and the children." Elizabeth's worry grew throughout the afternoon. Rebecca would need constant attention, and Mary would be frightened by the storm's intensity. Samuel might enjoy the excitement initially, but being trapped indoors would make him restless and difficult to manage. The thought of Amos struggling alone with the 3 children while wondering about her made her chest tight with anxiety. As evening approached, they heard someone calling from outside. David opened the door to find Henry Yoder on snowshoes, breathing heavily from the exertion of traveling through the deep drifts. "Thank God you're safe," Henry called. "I've been checking on everyone I can reach. Amos sent me to see about Elizabeth." Elizabeth's heart jumped. "Is everything all right? The children?" "They're fine, but Amos is beside himself worrying about you. He wanted to try to get here himself, but he had to stay with the children." Henry stomped the snow from his shoes as he entered. "He asked me to tell you that your things are ready whenever you want to come home." Home. The word sent warmth through Elizabeth that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. "The roads are still impassable," David pointed out. But I managed to get here on snowshoes." "Elizabeth could make it back the same way if she's willing." Elizabeth looked at the concerned faces around her. Martha's expression was worried but understanding, while David seemed resigned to whatever decision she would make. "I should go," Elizabeth said quietly. "The children need me, and Amos shouldn't have to manage everything alone." "Are you sure?" Martha asked gently. "Once you're there, you'll be snowed in together until the road's clear. Tongues will wag." Elizabeth had been thinking about little else for 3 days. Anna's accusations, the community's expectations, the potential consequences of following her heart, all of it paled beside the simple truth that the Mast family needed her. "Let people talk," she said firmly. "Those children are more important than gossip." Henry nodded. "Amos said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that he's made sure the leaking roof in the Dottie house was fixed, and he had already chinked all the gaps around the windows. He said you'd know that. But it's warm and ready for you." I had my boys help him. The trek back to the Mast farm was challenging even with snowshoes. Elizabeth followed Henry's path through drifts that sometimes came up to her knees, grateful for the heavy cloak Martha had insisted she borrow. The wind had died down, but the cold was intense, making her cheeks sting and her breath form clouds in the frigid air. As they approached the farmhouse, Elizabeth could see warm light glowing from every window. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, and she caught the scent of something savory cooking. Amos had clearly been managing the household competently in her absence. The kitchen door opened before they reached it, and Amos appeared silhouetted against the warm light. Relief flooded his face when he saw Elizabeth safely approaching. "God be praised," he said, reaching out to steady her as she removed the snowshoes. "I was so worried about you." "Elizabeth." Samuel's voice called from inside the house. "You came back." Before Elizabeth could even remove her cloak, all three children surrounded her. Samuel grabbed her around the waist, Mary clung to her skirt, and Rebecca toddled over with outstretched arms, babbling excitedly. "We missed you so much," Samuel said, his voice muffled against her coat. "Dad tried to make pancakes this morning, but they were all lumpy." "I was worried you wouldn't come back," Mary whispered, her gray eyes wide with the memory of fear. Elizabeth knelt to embrace all three children at once, feeling her heart swell with love and belonging. "I'm here now. I'm sorry I was away." "Thank you, Henry," Amos said, clasping his neighbor's hand. "I owe you a debt for bringing her safely home." Henry waved off the thanks. "Just being neighborly. I'll check on you all again in a few days, assuming I can make it through the drifts. I've had the boys shoveled away to the Dottie house, so you'll be able to get there." After Henry left, Elizabeth found herself alone with the family she'd come to love. The children chattered excitedly about their 3 days without her, how Samuel had helped his father with chores, how Mary had been extra good and quiet, how Rebecca had asked for Elizabeth constantly. "She started saying a new word while you were gone," Amos said, settling Rebecca on his lap. "Show Elizabeth, darling." Rebecca looked at Elizabeth with her gray eyes so like her father's, then pointed and said clearly, "Mama." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not." "She's been saying it since yesterday," Samuel interrupted eagerly. "She knows you take care of us like a mama does." Elizabeth glanced at Amos, whose expression was tender but unreadable. They both understood the significance of Rebecca's word choice and the complications it created. "Come," Amos said, rising with Rebecca still in his arms. "Let me show you what we've done to the Dottie house. The children can come too." "Are you sure? It's awful cold." Like Henry said, the path's been shoveled. And in truth, we all need to do something outside. It's gotten mighty small inside this house so long. The walk to the small house revealed the extent of Amos's work. He'd shoveled the porch himself, so in addition to the shoveled walkway, Elizabeth wouldn't have to battle through snow and wind for her daily trips back and forth. Inside the Dottie house, Elizabeth gasped at the transformation. The gaps around the windows had been sealed further with new wood and caulking. Heavy curtains now hung at the windows to keep out drafts. The roof leak had been completely repaired, and a new layer of wooden planks covered the floor. "Amos," Elizabeth said softly, running her hand along the smooth new door frame. "You didn't need to do all this." "Ja, I did. And Henry's boys helped." His voice was quiet but determined. "You nearly froze trying to live here as it was. I won't have you suffering for lack of proper shelter. And since you ain't decided to move in with us yet." Mary tugged on Samuel's trousers and whispered something. Elizabeth bent down to hear. "She wants to know if this means you're staying for good now," Samuel offered. Elizabeth looked around at the improved little house, then at Amos's hopeful face. "Your debt has made it very comfortable. I should be warm and safe here." "That's not what she means," Samuel said with the bluntness of childhood. "She wants to know if you're gonna marry Dad and be our real mama." The directness of the question hung in the air. Rebecca reached toward Elizabeth from her father's arms, repeating "Mama" hopefully. "Children," Amos said gently, "remember what we talked about? Elizabeth needs time to make important decisions." "But we want her to stay," Samuel insisted. "We already love her like a mama." "I love you, too," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. More than I ever thought possible." "Then why can't you just say ja?" Samuel asked with childhood logic. Elizabeth looked at Amos over the children's heads. His gray eyes held patience and understanding, but she could also see the hope he was trying to contain. Because saying ja to one thing sometimes means saying nay to other things, she said carefully. And I want to make sure I'm making the right choice for everyone. That evening, after the children were settled in bed, Elizabeth and Amos sat in the main house kitchen sharing coffee and the comfortable quiet that had developed between them over the weeks. The storm had intensified again, with wind rattling the windows and snow driving against the glass. I'm glad you came back, Amos said finally. The children weren't the only ones who missed you. I missed them too. All of you. Elizabeth wrapped her hands around her coffee mug for warmth. But Amos, we need to talk about the situation with Anna and her family. What about it? David was right about the potential consequences. Anna's father has influence in the community. If you humiliate his daughter. I'm not humiliating anyone. I never made promises to Anna that I'm now breaking. Elizabeth studied his face. But you did court her. People saw you together. Amos was quiet for a moment. After Sarah died, everyone kept telling me I needed to remarry quickly. For the children's sake, they said. Anna's family made their interest clear, and she's a good woman from a respectable family. I thought maybe practical affection would be enough. I took her riding a couple of times, but that was all. We weren't officially courting. What changed? You did. He looked at her directly. Elizabeth, I never felt for Anna a fraction of what I feel for you. I was settling for what seemed sensible instead of waiting for what I actually wanted. And what do you want? I want a woman who loves my children as fiercely as she would her own children. I want someone who brings joy and laughter back to this house. I want a partner who understands me without explanations, who makes me feel like the best version of myself. He paused. I want you. Elizabeth felt her resolve weakening. The age difference. Oh, 5 years is nothing. I have 3 beautiful children. If God blesses us with more, wonderful. If not, we'll pour our love into the ones we have. Anna is younger, prettier, from a better family. Anna is not you. Amos reached across the table and took her hand. Elizabeth, I don't want younger or prettier or better connected. I want the woman who taught Mary to trust again, who channels Samuel's energy into helpful tasks, who rocks Rebecca to sleep when she's feverish. I want the woman who makes this house feel like a home. Elizabeth stared down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally capable from years of hard work. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of not being enough. Of disappointing you when the newness wears off. Of the community never accepting me as your wife. She looked up at him. Of losing all of this if it doesn't work out. Elizabeth. Amos stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. Do you love me? The question was simple, but the answer felt like stepping off a cliff. Ja, she whispered. I love you. Then trust that love. Trust me. Trust that God brought you here for a reason. What if Anna causes trouble for the children? What if her father makes things difficult for you? Then we'll handle it together. Amos reached up and cupped her cheek gently. Elizabeth, I've spent 2 years just surviving, just getting through each day. You've made me want to live again, to hope again. Don't let fear steal that from us. Elizabeth leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his palm that spoke of hard, honest work. I don't know how to be courted, she said softly. I don't know the steps, the expectations. There are no steps with us, Amos said gently. We've already been living as a family in all the ways that matter. All that's left is to make it official. Is that a proposal? Amos smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Elizabeth Beiler, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and a mother to my children? Will you let me love you for the rest of my life? Elizabeth looked into his dear face, seeing past the worry lines to the good man beneath. She thought of Samuel's eager chatter, Mary's whispered confidences, Rebecca's trusting embrace. She thought of mornings spent cooking breakfast together, evenings mending by lamplight, the thousand small moments that had woven them together into a family. "Ja," she said simply. "Ja, I'll marry you." Amos's smile was radiant as he stood and drew her into his arms. "Thank God," he murmured against her hair. "I was afraid I'd have to convince you with my superior pancake-making skills." Elizabeth laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Your pancakes are terrible." "I know. That's why I need you." As they held each other in the warm kitchen while the storm raged outside, Elizabeth felt peace settle into her heart. There would be challenges ahead: Anna's anger, community gossip, the practical details of joining their lives together. But for the first time in her 30 years, she was choosing love over duty, hope over fear. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the Mast farmhouse, all was warmth and joy and the promise of tomorrow. Chapter 8. The morning after Elizabeth accepted Amos's proposal dawned clear and bitterly cold, with sunlight sparkling off snowdrifts that reached nearly to the farmhouse windows. Elizabeth woke in her improved Dotty house feeling both exhilarated and anxious about the day ahead. The children would need to be told officially, though they'd already made their feelings abundantly clear. More daunting was the prospect of facing the community's reaction once word spread. She was able to make her way to the Mast farm without much fuss. No new snow had fallen, though the wind had drifted snow on some of the shoveled path. Still, it wasn't too bad and didn't take her long. She stepped into the warmth of the Mast family's morning routine. Samuel was already awake and bouncing with energy, while Mary sat at the table in her nightgown, hair tousled from sleep. Rebecca babbled happily from her high chair as Amos attempted to feed her porridge, most of which seemed to be ending up on her face rather than in her mouth. "Good morning," Elizabeth said, tying on her apron and moving naturally into the breakfast preparations. "Elizabeth," Samuel called excitedly. "Did you sleep warm in your fixed house?" "Very warm, thank you." "Your dad did excellent work." Amos looked up from Rebecca's messy feeding and smiled. "The shoveled path was still all right?" "It was," Elizabeth said, already mixing batter for pancakes. "Though I suppose I should get used to thinking of this as home now." Samuel's head whipped around. "Does that mean?" "It means," Amos said, lifting Rebecca from her high chair to clean her face, "that Elizabeth has agreed to become your new ma'am." The explosion of joy from Samuel was immediate and deafening. He leaped from his chair and ran to Elizabeth, wrapping his arms around her waist and spinning in circles. "I knew it. I knew you'd say ja. Wait until I tell everyone at school." "Samuel," Elizabeth said gently, catching him to stop his spinning. "We need to talk about that. This news needs to be shared carefully, at the right time." Mary had approached silently and now stood beside Elizabeth, her gray eyes shining with happiness. She whispered something. "She wants to know if she can call you ma'am now," Samuel said, though Elizabeth had understood Mary's whispered words perfectly. Elizabeth knelt to Mary's level and took her small hands. "Would you like to?" Mary nodded vigorously, then threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck. "Ma'am," she whispered, testing the word. Elizabeth's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you too, sweetheart." Rebecca, watching the emotional scene from her father's arms, pointed at Elizabeth and said clearly, "Mama." "Mama!" "Ja, darling," Amos said softly. "That's your new mama." After breakfast, while the children played in the front room, Elizabeth and Amos discussed the practical aspects of their engagement. The most pressing issue was how to handle the announcement to the community, particularly given Anna Schrock's expectations. "I should speak with Bishop Troyer first," Amos said. "Ask him to publish our engagement at the next service." Elizabeth nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nervousness. "What about Anna? Shouldn't you speak with her before she hears it publicly?" "Ja, that would be the kind thing to do. Though I'm not looking forward to that conversation. Perhaps I should come with you." Amos shook his head. "This is my responsibility. Anna deserves an honest explanation from me alone." They were interrupted by the sound of a buggy in the yard. Through the kitchen window, Elizabeth could see Dr. Mitchell's familiar black bag as he stepped down from his sleigh. "That's odd," Amos said, frowning. "No one's sick." Dr. Mitchell knocked briskly and entered when Amos called for him to come in. He was an older man with kind eyes and graying whiskers, well respected throughout the community for his dedication to his patients. "Good morning, Amos. And you must be Elizabeth," he said, removing his heavy coat. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit, but I wanted to check on Rebecca after her illness last month. Mrs. Yoder mentioned she'd been quite sick." "She's fully recovered now," Elizabeth assured him, lifting Rebecca to show her healthy, rosy cheeks. Dr. Mitchell examined the toddler thoroughly, listening to her chest and checking her growth. "She looks wonderful," he pronounced. "Much stronger than when I saw her as a baby. Whatever you're doing is working well." "Elizabeth took excellent care of her during the illness," Amos said. "Steam treatments, herbal teas, constant nursing." Dr. Mitchell smiled at Elizabeth approvingly. "Experience caring for family members, I assume?" "My parents and younger cousins when I was growing up." "Well, you have good instincts. Rebecca is thriving under your care." He packed his instruments back into his bag. "I also wanted to mention that I've been hearing talk in town about your plans here." Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm. "What kind of talk?" "The supportive kind, mostly. People are saying how much happier the Mast children seem since you arrived, how well you've managed the household. Though to be honest, as an outsider, so to speak, I don't hear everything." Amos and Elizabeth exchanged glances. "What about the Schrock family?" Amos asked carefully. Dr. Mitchell's expression grew diplomatic. "Mrs. Schrock has been, well, she hasn't held back her concerns. But most people remember how distraught these children were after their mother died, and they can see the improvement now." After Dr. Mitchell left, Elizabeth felt both encouraged and worried. Community support would be helpful, but Anna's mother was clearly working to undermine her reputation. "I should go see Anna today," Amos said decisively. "Get this settled before rumors grow worse." "Are you sure you don't want me to come?" "Nay. Anna and I need to have an honest conversation without distractions." He touched Elizabeth's cheek gently. "Don't worry. Nothing she says will change my mind about marrying you." That afternoon, while Amos was away, Elizabeth kept the children busy with indoor activities while snow continued to fall lightly outside. Samuel worked on a wooden puzzle Amos had made for him, while Mary helped Elizabeth bake bread and Rebecca napped peacefully in her crib. "Mama," Mary said as they kneaded dough together, "will you teach me to make lebkuchen cookies soon?" "Of course. We'll make them next week for Christmas." Elizabeth smiled at how naturally Mary was using the name Mama. "What other things would you like to learn?" "Everything you know," Mary said seriously. "I want to be a good helper like you." Elizabeth's heart swelled with love for this earnest little girl who had blossomed so much in recent weeks. "You're already a wonderful helper. But I'll teach you anything you want to learn." Samuel looked up from his puzzle. "Will you teach me man things too? Like how to fix roofs and chink windows like Dad did?" "Those are important skills for a man to have," Elizabeth agreed. "Though I think your dad is a better teacher for those things than I am." "But you know lady things and man things both," Samuel pointed out with childhood logic. "You can cook and sew, but you also know about doctoring sick people and fixing holes in boots." Elizabeth realized he was right. Her years of caring for aging parents had taught her many skills typically divided between men's and women's work. "I suppose I do know a little of both." When Amos returned as evening approached, his expression was grim but resolute. He hung up his coat and hat with deliberate movements that suggested the conversation with Anna had been difficult. "How did it go?" Elizabeth asked softly, while the children played nearby. "As well as could be expected." Anna was upset. "Upset how?" Amos sat heavily at the kitchen table. "She accused me of leading her on, of using you to make her jealous, of choosing a spinster over a young woman." He rubbed his temples. She said things about you that I don't need to tell you. Elizabeth felt her stomach knot. What did you tell her? The truth. That I never made promises I'm now breaking, that my feelings for you developed naturally over time, and that I'm choosing the woman I love regardless of what anyone else thinks is practical. Did she accept that? Eventually. But she also made it clear that her family won't let this go quietly. She said her father is already sharing with other prominent men in the community about my poor judgment. Before Elizabeth could respond, Samuel appeared at Amos's elbow. Dad, why do you look so sad? Are you worried about marrying Mama? Amos pulled his son onto his lap. Not worried about marrying her, son. Just thinking about some grown-up problems that need to be solved. What kind of problems? Elizabeth and Amos exchanged glances over Samuel's head. How much should they explain to children about adult politics and community tensions? Some people think Dad should marry someone else instead of me, Elizabeth said carefully. They're not happy about his choice. Samuel's brow furrowed. But you're the best choice. You already love us, and you make the house happy. Why would anyone want Dad to marry someone who doesn't love us yet? Sometimes adults make decisions based on things besides love, Amos explained. That's dumb, Samuel declared with his characteristic bluntness. Love is way more important than other stuff. Mary had drifted over during the conversation and now climbed onto Elizabeth's lap. People won't try to take you away from us, will they? She asked. Elizabeth's heart clenched at the fear in Mary's voice. This child had already lost one mother, she shouldn't have to worry about losing another. No one can take me away if I don't want to go, Elizabeth assured her. And I want to stay with you and Dad and Samuel and Rebecca forever. Promise? Mary asked. Elizabeth looked into Mary's gray eyes, so like her father's, and made the commitment with her whole heart. I promise. That evening, after the children were settled in bed, Elizabeth and Amos sat in the kitchen making plans for their future. Despite the challenges they knew lay ahead, there was something deeply satisfying about discussing practical details, when to hold the wedding, where Elizabeth's few belongings would fit in the house, how to handle the publishing of their betrothal. Bishop Troyer will announce it this Sunday, Amos said. After that, there's no turning back. Are you having second thoughts? Elizabeth asked. Never. You? Elizabeth considered the question seriously. I'm nervous about the community's reaction, and I'm sorry that Anna is hurt. But nay second thoughts about marrying you. Good. Because I have something for you. Amos rose and went to a drawer in the kitchen dresser, returning with a small wooden box. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to mark our engagement. Elizabeth opened the box to find a simple thimble. It was clearly old but well cared for, polished to a gentle shine. It was my grandmother's, Amos explained. She would have liked you. You have the same practical wisdom and gentle strength. Elizabeth slipped the thimble onto her finger, surprised by how perfectly it fit. It's beautiful. Are you sure your family won't mind you giving it to me instead of someone else they might have preferred? My family wants me to be happy. This thimble belongs with the woman I love. Later that night, as Elizabeth settled into her warm, comfortable bed in the improved Dottie house, she looked at the thimble on her bedside stand glinting in the lamplight. In just 4 days, her entire life had changed. She'd gone from being a temporary employee to an engaged woman, from caring for other people's children to preparing to become a mother herself. As she drifted off to sleep, Elizabeth felt peace in her heart. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to belong. Outside, snow continued to fall steadily, building drifts that would make travel difficult for several more days. The storm was far from over, in more ways than one. But Elizabeth was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. Whatever came next, she would face it as part of the Mast family, with love and determination as her guides. Chapter 9. The weather forecast proved ominously accurate. By Friday afternoon, the barometric pressure had dropped noticeably, and the western sky had taken on the peculiar yellow-gray color that old-timers recognized as the harbinger of a serious storm. Amos spent the morning making final preparations, bringing extra firewood close to the house, checking that the livestock had adequate shelter and feed, and ensuring their food supplies could last several days. Elizabeth worked alongside him with growing unease. She'd lived through many Pennsylvania winters, but Kansas storms had a reputation for intensity that made even experienced farmers nervous. As she helped carry armloads of split oak from the woodpile to the kitchen, she noticed how still the air had become, an unnatural quiet that seemed to press against her eardrums. "How bad do you think it will be?" she asked, stacking wood beside the kitchen stove. Amos paused in his work to study the darkening sky. "Bad enough. The animals are restless, and my grandfather always said when the horses pace in their stalls, you'd better prepare for the worst." Samuel bounced around the kitchen, excited by the prospect of being snowed in. "Will we be trapped for days and days? Will the snow come up and into the windows?" "The snow can't come in the windows, but we might be inside for days," Amos replied seriously. "That's why we're making sure we have everything we need inside the house." Mary clung closer to Elizabeth than usual, her gray eyes wide with concern. "She wants to know if the storm will hurt the house," Samuel said. "The house is strong," Elizabeth assured her, smoothing Mary's blonde hair. "Your dad built it well, and we'll all be safe inside together." By Saturday morning, the first snowflakes were falling, small, hard pellets that stung when they hit exposed skin. The wind was picking up steadily, creating an ominous moaning sound as it swept across the fields and around the farmhouse corners. "I need to make one last trip to town," Amos announced over breakfast. "Old Widow Brennan asked me to pick up her medicine from Dr. Mitchell, and with this storm coming, it might be her last chance to get it for weeks." Elizabeth felt a stab of anxiety. "Is it safe to travel?" "The snow is already starting. I'll take the strong gelding and the enclosed buggy. If I leave now, I can be back before the worst of it hits." Amos was already reaching for his heaviest coat. "Mrs. Brennan is 83 and has a weak heart. She needs this medicine." Elizabeth understood. In their close-knit community, neighbors looked after each other, especially the elderly and vulnerable. "How long will you be gone?" 3 hours at most. For if the roads are already getting difficult." Samuel looked up from his porridge with alarm. "You're leaving? But what if the storm comes while you're gone?" "Then Elizabeth will take good care of you until I get back," Amos said, ruffling his son's hair. "She's very capable in emergencies." After Amos left, Elizabeth tried to keep the children occupied with indoor activities while watching the weather with growing concern. The snow was falling more heavily now, and the wind had increased to a steady howl that rattled the windows. By noon, she could no longer see the barn clearly through the swirling white. "Mama," Mary whispered, tugging on Elizabeth's skirt, "I'm scared. The wind sounds angry." Elizabeth lifted Mary onto her lap and held her close. "Storms do sound frightening, but remember what your dad said, the house is strong and we're safe inside." Rebecca seemed to sense the tension in the air and became fussy, wanting to be held constantly. Elizabeth carried the baby while trying to prepare the noon meal, grateful for Samuel's help in setting the table and entertaining his little sisters. "When will Dad be home?" Samuel asked for the third time, peering out the window at the increasingly white world. "Soon," Elizabeth replied, though her own worry was growing. It had been 4 hours since Amos left, and the storm was intensifying rapidly. Visibility was now near zero, and she could hear the wind driving snow against the house with increasing violence. By late afternoon, Elizabeth had to face the truth: Amos was trapped somewhere, unable to make it home through the blizzard. The children sensed her anxiety despite her efforts to remain calm. "Where's Dad?" Samuel asked, his usual cheerfulness replaced by worry. "He should be home by now." Elizabeth gathered all 3 children close to her in the kitchen, where the wood stove provided both warmth and comfort. "Your dad is very smart and experienced with winter weather. If the storm got too bad for him to travel safely, he would have found shelter somewhere to wait it out. But we don't know where he is," Samuel said, his voice small. "Nay, but we know he's safe somewhere warm and dry, just like we are." And as soon as the storm passes, he'll come home to us. Mary began to cry silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. Elizabeth's heart ached for the little girl. "Sweetheart," Elizabeth said gently, wiping Mary's tears, "remember that your dad loves you very much. He would never take unnecessary risks that might keep him from coming home to you." As evening approached and the storm showed no signs of diminishing, Elizabeth made the practical decision to move the children's sleeping arrangements to the kitchen, where the wood stove could keep them warmest through what promised to be a long, cold night. She dragged mattresses and quilts downstairs, creating a cozy sleeping area near the stove. The children huddled together while she prepared a simple supper, their usual chatter replaced by worried silence. "Tell us a story, Mama," Mary whispered as they ate by lamplight, with wind howling outside like something alive and hungry. Elizabeth searched her memory for stories that would comfort rather than frighten. Once upon a time, there was a family of rabbits who lived in a warm burrow beneath a great oak tree. She spun a tale of brave rabbit parents who always found their way home to their children, no matter how fierce the winter storms became. The children listened intently, drawing comfort from the familiar rhythm of storytelling. As the night deepened, the storm's intensity became truly frightening. Snow was driving against the windows with such force that Elizabeth worried the glass might break. The wind screamed around the house corners, finding every small gap and sending icy drafts through rooms she'd thought were well sealed. "The house is shaking," Samuel observed, his voice tight with fear. Elizabeth could feel it too, the entire structure seemed to shudder with each powerful gust of wind. She gathered the children closer, projecting a calm she didn't feel. "Strong houses are built to flex a little in big storms," she said. "It's like how trees bend in the wind instead of breaking." Rebecca had finally fallen asleep in Elizabeth's arms, but Samuel and Mary remained wide awake, too frightened by the storm's violence to relax. Elizabeth found herself singing softly old hymns her mother had sung to her during childhood storms, songs of comfort and protection. "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side." Gradually, the familiar words and melodies worked their calming magic. Mary's tense body relaxed against Elizabeth's side, and Samuel's worried questions faded into drowsy murmurs. But Elizabeth remained vigilant through the long night, listening to every sound the storm made and praying for Amos's safety. Where was he? Had he found adequate shelter? Was he warm and dry, or was he struggling somewhere in the white fury that raged outside their walls? "Please, God," she prayed silently, "keep him safe and bring him home to us. These children have already lost one parent, don't let them lose another." The storm continued to rage with undiminished fury as Sunday dawned gray and wild. Elizabeth woke the children with warm milk and leftover bread, trying to maintain normal routines despite their extraordinary circumstances. "Is Dad coming home today?" Samuel asked hopefully. Elizabeth looked out at the continuing blizzard and felt her heart sink. The storm isn't finished yet. But as soon as it stops, he'll be here. They spent the day huddled in the warm kitchen, playing quiet games and telling stories while the wind continued its relentless assault. Elizabeth rationed their firewood carefully, knowing she needed to make it last until Amos returned and could help access the outdoor woodpile. By Sunday evening, a new concern had emerged. Rebecca had developed a slight cough and felt warm to the touch. Elizabeth's heart clenched with worry as she remembered the baby's previous bout with chest illness. "Is Rebecca getting sick again?" Samuel asked, noticing Elizabeth's increased attention to his little sister. "Just a little cough," Elizabeth said, trying to keep worry from her voice. "We'll keep her extra warm and give her plenty of fluids." But as the second night of the storm wore on, Rebecca's condition worsened. Her cough became more persistent, and her fever climbed steadily. Elizabeth found herself reliving the frightening days of the baby's previous illness, but now without Amos's help and support. Mary woke around midnight to the sound of Rebecca's labored breathing. "Is the baby very sick, Mama?" she whispered fearfully. Elizabeth smoothed Mary's hair with one hand while holding the feverish Rebecca with the other. "She's fighting off a cold, but we're going to take good care of her." "I wish Dad was here," Samuel said quietly from his makeshift bed near the stove. "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." As Monday's grey dawn broke over a world still locked in the storm's grip, Elizabeth faced the terrifying reality of caring for a seriously ill baby while trapped in a house with 2 other frightened children and no way to get help. Rebecca's fever was high, her breathing was becoming increasingly labored, and Elizabeth could see the familiar signs of the chest infection that had nearly killed the child before. But this time, Elizabeth was completely alone. God, she prayed desperately as she prepared steam treatments with trembling hands, I can't lose this child. Please give me the strength and wisdom to save her. And please bring Amos home to us safely. Outside, the wind held its answer, and snow continued to fall from a pitiless gray sky. Chapter 10. Monday night brought Elizabeth's worst fears to reality. Rebecca's fever spiked dangerously high, and her small body burned like a coal in Elizabeth's arms. The baby's breathing had become shallow and rapid, with a rattling sound that made Elizabeth's blood run cold. She had seen this before, the beginning of pneumonia that could steal a child's life within hours. Samuel, Elizabeth called softly, trying not to let panic creep into her voice. I need you to help me with something very important. Samuel scrambled up from his makeshift bed, his dark hair tousled and his eyes wide with worry. What's wrong with Rebecca? She sounds funny when she breathes. She's very sick, and we need to help her fight this illness. Can you be my brave assistant? Samuel nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation despite his 10 years. Elizabeth had already moved Rebecca's crib down to the kitchen for warmth, but now she realized they needed more aggressive treatment. We're going to make steam to help Rebecca breathe easier. I need you to fill the big pot with water while I get herbs from the pantry. Mary had awakened at the sound of their voices and now stood uncertainly by the stove, her small face pale with fear. She whispered something too quietly for Elizabeth to hear. She wants to know if Rebecca is going to die like our first man did, Samuel translated, his voice breaking slightly. Elizabeth's throat constricted, but she forced herself to speak with calm confidence. We're not going to let that happen. Rebecca is strong, and we're going to fight this sickness together. She set the large pot on the stove and added sage, thyme, and chamomile from her carefully hoarded supplies. While the water heated, she prepared willow bark tea, the closest thing she had to medicine that might bring down Rebecca's fever. Mary, Elizabeth said gently, can you sing to Rebecca while I work? She loves your voice. Mary nodded and began humming a lullaby in her soft, sweet voice. Rebecca's restless movements seemed to settle slightly at the familiar sound. The next hours passed in desperate activity. Elizabeth created tent after tent of steam, holding Rebecca under blankets while the baby breathed the herb-scented vapor. She dribbled tiny amounts of willow bark tea between Rebecca's lips, tried to cool her fever with damp cloths, and prayed continuously for the child's recovery. Samuel proved to be an invaluable helper, fetching clean cloths, keeping the fire going, and even managing to get Mary to eat a little bread and milk. His usual childish chatter was replaced by mature focus on the crisis at hand. Is the medicine helping? He asked anxiously as Elizabeth emerged from another steam treatment with Rebecca limp and exhausted in her arms. I think so. Her breathing sounds a tiny bit clearer. Elizabeth wasn't sure if this was true or just desperate hope, but she needed to keep the children's spirits up. As the night deepened, Rebecca's condition seemed to stabilize somewhat, but Elizabeth didn't dare relax her vigilance. She dozed fitfully in the rocking chair, holding the baby close and waking frequently to check her temperature and breathing. Around 3 a.m, Mary crept over and climbed onto Elizabeth's lap beside Rebecca. I'm scared, Mama, she whispered. Elizabeth shifted to make room for both girls, feeling the weight of responsibility for all 3 children pressing on her shoulders. Outside, the storm continued to rage with undiminished fury. I know, sweetheart. I'm a little scared too. But do you know what I do when I'm frightened? Mary shook her head. I remember that God loves us and wants to take care of us, even in scary times. And I remember that we're not alone, we have each other. But what if Dad never comes back? Mary's whispered fear echoed what they were all thinking. Elizabeth tightened her arms around both children. Your dad is a strong, smart man who loves you more than anything in the world. He will move heaven and earth to get back to you. We just have to be patient and brave while we wait. Samuel had been listening from his bed and now spoke up quietly. Elizabeth. I mean, Mama, what if Rebecca gets sicker? What if the steam and tea don't work? Elizabeth looked at his earnest young face, seeing Amos's gray eyes and determined chin. This boy was growing up too fast, forced by circumstances to face adult fears. Then we'll try something else. We'll keep fighting for her, no matter what. That's what families do, we don't give up on each other. Even when it's really hard? Especially when it's really hard. As Tuesday's gray dawn struggled through the storm-lashed windows, Elizabeth realized Rebecca was breathing more easily. The baby's fever had broken during the early morning hours, and though she was weak and fretful, the immediate crisis seemed to have passed. Look! Samuel said excitedly, pointing to Rebecca. She's trying to sit up. Indeed, Rebecca was showing the first signs of her old spirit, babbling weakly and reaching for Elizabeth's cap strings with shaky hands. Mama! Mama! Rebecca said clearly, her voice hoarse but determined. Elizabeth felt tears of relief stream down her cheeks. Sweetheart. Mama's here. You're going to be all right. Mary clapped her hands softly and whispered something that made Samuel grin. She says Rebecca is too stubborn to stay sick, Samuel translated. For the first time in days, Elizabeth felt hope stirring in her chest. Rebecca was recovering, the children had shown remarkable courage and maturity during the crisis, and surely the storm couldn't continue much longer. But as Tuesday wore on, her optimism began to fade again. The blizzard showed no signs of weakening, and their firewood supply was running dangerously low. Elizabeth had been rationing carefully, but 3 days of continuous burning had depleted their stores faster than anticipated. Mama, Samuel said around midday, why is it getting colder in here? Elizabeth had noticed it too, the kitchen wasn't maintaining its warmth despite the fire. She checked the wood box and felt her heart sink. Perhaps 6 hours of fuel remained, maybe 8 if she was very careful. We need to conserve our heat, she told the children. Let's gather all our blankets and quilts and make a cozy nest right here by the stove. They spent the afternoon huddled together under every available covering, with Elizabeth telling endless stories to distract the children from their deteriorating situation. Rebecca continued to recover slowly, but Elizabeth worried about what would happen when their fire went out completely. As evening approached and Elizabeth fed their next-to-last piece of wood to the stove, Mary tugged on her sleeve. She hears something, Samuel translated excitedly. Outside. Elizabeth strained her ears above the wind's roar. Was that shouting? The sound of someone calling their names? Amos, she called at the top of her lungs, hope flooding through her. Amos, we're here. The answering shout was definitely his voice, though nearly lost in the storm's fury. Elizabeth could hear him struggling through the deep snow, calling their names and getting closer to the house. Dad's coming! Samuel shouted, dancing with excitement despite his exhaustion. I told you he'd come home. Mary began to cry, tears of relief and joy rather than fear. Even Rebecca seemed to understand that something wonderful was happening, babbling and reaching toward the kitchen door. The door burst open in a swirl of snow and wind, and Amos stumbled inside, more ice than man. His beard was white with frost, his clothes were crusted with snow, and he moved like someone at the very end of his endurance. God be praised, he gasped, leaning against the door to force it closed against the wind. You are all safe. Elizabeth was on her feet instantly, Rebecca in her arms. Amos! We were so worried. Where have you been? Trapped at the Brennan place when the storm hit, he said, pulling off his frozen outer clothes with stiff fingers. Couldn't get through the drifts until this afternoon. He looked at Rebecca. Has the baby been sick? Since Sunday night. She had terrible congestion in her lungs again, but she's better now. Elizabeth's voice broke with exhaustion and relief. I was so scared, and we're almost out of firewood, and I didn't know what to do if you didn't come back. Amos crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled both Elizabeth and Rebecca into his arms, with Samuel and Mary quickly joining the embrace. You did everything exactly right, he murmured against Elizabeth's hair. You likely saved her life, and you kept our children safe and brave. I'm so proud of you. We took care of each other, Samuel said importantly. Mama showed us how to be a strong family. Ja, Mary whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mama never gave up on any of us. As Amos built up the fire with what he'd managed to bring in from outside, Elizabeth realized something profound had changed during their 3 days of crisis. She was no longer the hired woman caring for someone else's children. She had become their mother in every way that mattered, tested by fire and proven worthy of their trust. How did you make it through those drifts? Elizabeth asked as they all settled around the renewed warmth of the stove. Determination, Amos said simply, pulling her close to his side while Rebecca dozed contentedly on his lap. Nothing on earth was going to keep me from getting home to my family. It had already been much too long. His family. Elizabeth felt the words settle into her heart like a benediction. Through storm and sickness, fear and endurance, they had become what she'd always longed for, a true family, bound not just by love but by shared struggle and sacrifice. Chapter 11. Amos woke before dawn on Wednesday morning, instantly alert despite his exhaustion. The house was finally quiet, the wind had died during the night, and for the first time in days, no snow pelted against the windows. He could hear the soft, even breathing of his children sleeping peacefully around the kitchen stove, and the gentle sound of Elizabeth moving carefully about the room, trying not to wake anyone. She was kneeling beside Rebecca's crib, her hand resting lightly on the baby's forehead to check for fever. Even in the dim light of the banked fire, Amos could see the toll the last 3 days had taken. Her face was pale with exhaustion, her shoulders drooped with weariness, and her usually neat hair had escaped its pins. Yet she had never looked more beautiful to him. "How is she?" he whispered, rising carefully from his blankets. Elizabeth looked up, and he saw relief flood her features. Cool to the touch. Her breathing is clear, and she slept through the night without coughing. Amos moved to stand beside her, looking down at his youngest daughter sleeping peacefully. You saved her. We all did. Samuel was so brave, helping with everything. And Mary sang to her for hours, kept her calm when she was frightened. Elizabeth's voice was thick with emotion. They were incredible, Amos. So much stronger than children should have to be. They learned that strength from watching you. Amos reached over to support her, noticing how she swayed slightly with exhaustion. When did you last sleep more than an hour at a time? I don't remember. Sunday night, maybe? Elizabeth rubbed her eyes, and Amos saw her hands trembling slightly, the aftermath of 3 days of constant worry and vigilance. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she finally allowed herself to lean on someone else's strength. He felt her body sag against his, all the fear and responsibility she'd carried alone finally finding release. I was so scared, she whispered against his chest. When Rebecca got sick and I couldn't get help, when the firewood was running out, when I didn't know if you were alive or dead. I kept thinking, what if I lose them? What if I fail them the way I did with my parents? Elizabeth. Amos tightened his arms around her, feeling his own throat tighten with emotion. You didn't fail anyone. You are magnificent. I didn't feel magnificent. I felt terrified and overwhelmed and completely out of my depth. That's what makes you brave, being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Amos pulled back to look at her face. Do you know what I was thinking about during those 3 days when I couldn't get home? Elizabeth shook her head, her honey brown eyes searching his. I was thinking about how wrong I'd been to wait so long to tell you I loved you. How foolish I'd been to worry about what other people thought when I had found the most precious gift I could give a woman who would love my children as fiercely as their own mother did. Amos. Nay, let me finish. His hands framed her face gently. I was thinking about how you sing to Rebecca when she's feverish, how you've taught Mary to trust again, how you challenged Samuel to be his best self. I was thinking about how you make this house feel like a home instead of just a place where we survive. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. I love them so much. When Rebecca was struggling to breathe, when Mary was so frightened, when Samuel was trying so hard to be brave. I realized these aren't just children I care for. They're my children, in my heart. They've been your children since the day you arrived, Amos said softly. I just took too long to see it myself. And now? Now I know that God didn't send you here to be a temporary solution. He sent you to be our missing piece, the one who would make us whole again. They stood holding each other in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the sleeping children who had become the center of both their worlds. Outside, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to penetrate the storm clouds, casting pale gold light through the frost-covered windows. The storm is ending, Elizabeth observed softly. But we weathered it together. Amos looked at her seriously. Elizabeth, what happened here these past 3 days, it showed me something important. What? That you don't just love my children, you're willing to fight for them, sacrifice for them, risk everything to keep them safe. You're already their mother in every way that matters. Elizabeth felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. I never thought I'd have children of my own. I'd given up on that dream years ago. Dreams change, Amos said gently. Sometimes God gives us something even better than what we originally wanted. They were interrupted by a small voice from the floor. Mama? Dad? Mary was sitting up in her nest of blankets, her blonde hair tangled from sleep and her gray eyes wide with concern. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, sweetheart, Elizabeth said, immediately going to kneel beside Mary. Your dad is home safe, Rebecca is feeling much better, and the storm has stopped. Mary looked out the window at the gradually brightening sky, then back at Elizabeth and Amos. Are you still going to marry us? Even after we were so much trouble during the storm? Amos laughed, the first genuinely happy sound he'd made in days. Mary, you weren't trouble. You were brave and helpful and wonderful. And I'm still going to marry your mama as soon as Bishop Troyer can arrange it. When will that be? Samuel's sleepy voice came from his blankets near the stove. As soon as the roads are clear enough for travel, Amos replied. Why? Are you eager for the wedding? Samuel sat up, suddenly fully awake. I want to tell everyone at school that Elizabeth is really our mama now, not just pretending to be. I was never pretending, Elizabeth said softly. From the very first day, loving you felt completely real to me. Rebecca chose that moment to wake up, sitting up in her crib and looking around at her family with bright, healthy eyes. When she saw Elizabeth, she reached out her arms and said clearly, Mama. Up, Mama. Elizabeth lifted the baby, marveling at how much stronger Rebecca felt after just one night of proper rest. There's my brave girl. How are you feeling? Bessa. Rebecca declared, making everyone smile. As the morning progressed and normal routines resumed, Amos found himself watching Elizabeth with new eyes. He'd loved her before the storm, but seeing her during the crisis had shown him depths of strength and devotion he was still processing. She moved through the kitchen preparing breakfast with quiet competence, checking on each child's needs, managing the household tasks that had piled up during their emergency. But there was something different about her now, a settled confidence, as if she'd finally found her true place in the world. Elizabeth, he said as they worked together to prepare the noon meal, I have something to tell you. She looked up from the stew she was stirring. What is it? Yesterday morning, when I was trapped at the Brennan place watching the storm get worse, Mrs. Brennan said something that's been on my mind. What did she say? She said that in 60 years of marriage, she'd learned that love isn't about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone worth weathering storms with. Amos moved closer. These past 3 days showed me that's exactly what I've found in you. Elizabeth's cheeks flushed pink. I feel the same way. When I thought I might lose you to the storm, when I was alone with the children facing Rebecca's illness, I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped thinking about this as temporary work and started thinking about it as my real life. It is your real life. This is your home, we're your family, and nothing is ever going to change that. Even when people gossip about our, courtship? With me staying here so much unchaperoned? Even then, Elizabeth, what people saw before the storm was a hired woman caring for someone else's children. What they'll see now is a mother who made sacrifices to save her daughter. As if to emphasize his point, Rebecca toddled over and wrapped her arms around Elizabeth's legs, looking up with adoring eyes. "Mama, up!" Elizabeth lifted the baby, and Rebecca immediately snuggled against her neck with the complete trust of a child for her mother. The sight made Amos's chest tight with emotion. "She knows," he said softly. "They all know. You're not the woman I hired to care for my children, you're the woman God sent to complete our family." That afternoon, as the sun finally broke through the clouds for the first time in days, Henry Yoder appeared on snowshoes to check on their welfare. His eyes widened when he saw the scene inside the warm kitchen, Elizabeth and Amos working side by side while the children played happily around them, Rebecca babbling contentedly in her high chair. "Thank God you're all safe," Henry said, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "We were worried when the storm lasted so long. How did you manage with Amos trapped away from home?" "Elizabeth took care of everything," Samuel announced proudly. "She made Rebecca all better when she was really sick, and she kept us warm and brave even when we ran out of wood." Henry looked at Elizabeth with new respect. "You nursed the baby through illness during the storm? Without help?" "The children helped," Elizabeth said quietly. "We took care of each other." "She saved Rebecca," Amos said firmly. "Steam treatments, herbal medicines, constant nursing through 2 nights when the fever nearly took her." Henry nodded approvingly. Experience with sick children is a valuable skill for a mother. The word mother hung in the air, and Elizabeth again felt something settle into place in her heart. "Henry," Amos said, "when the road's clear enough for Bishop Troyer to travel, Elizabeth and I would like to talk to him about publishing our engagement. We want to be married as soon as possible." Henry smiled broadly. "After what I've seen here today, I think the whole community will understand why." That evening, as they settled into their normal routines with profound gratitude for ordinary comforts, Elizabeth reflected on how much had changed. She'd so recently been an engaged woman nervous about community acceptance. Now she was a mother who had proven herself under the most difficult circumstances possible. "Mama," Mary whispered as Elizabeth tucked her into her own bed for the first time since the storm began, "I'm not scared anymore." "About storms?" "About anything. Because now I know you'll always take care of us, no matter what happens." Elizabeth kissed Mary's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of her clean hair. "That's right, sweetheart. Always." As she prepared for bed in her own little house, Elizabeth looked at the simple silver thimble and felt peace settle into her heart. The storm had tested them all and proven what she'd hoped but hardly dared believe: they were already a family, bound not just by affection but by the deep ties that come from facing life's challenges together. Outside, stars were finally visible through the clearing clouds, and Elizabeth offered a prayer of gratitude for storms weathered and love discovered, for second chances and answered prayers, for the family she'd found in the most unexpected place. Chapter 12. The week following the blizzard brought an unexpected thaw that melted the worst of the snowdrifts, making travel possible once again. Elizabeth had hoped for a few more quiet days to prepare herself for the community's reaction to their engagement, but on Saturday morning, Bishop Troyer's familiar buggy appeared in the yard. "He's come to discuss the engagement announcement," Amos said, watching from the kitchen window as the bishop climbed down from his buggy with deliberate movements. Elizabeth felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. What if he disapproves? What if he thinks we're moving too quickly, or that the situation with Anna? "Then we'll explain our reasons and trust in God's guidance," Amos said firmly, though Elizabeth could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Bishop Troyer entered with his usual grave dignity, accepting Elizabeth's offer of coffee and settling at the kitchen table. The children, sensing the importance of the visit, played quietly in the front room while the adults talked. "I've come to hear directly from both of you about your intentions," the bishop began without preamble. "There's been considerable talk in the community since the storm." "What kind of talk?" Elizabeth asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Both kinds. Some are saying that Elizabeth proved herself a true mother during the crisis, risking her own safety to care for the children. Others are saying that circumstances have forced an unsuitable arrangement. Amos's jaw tightened. Unsuitable how? The Schrock family has been vocal about their concerns. They feel that promises were made and broken, that the community's expectations were disregarded. Bishop Troyer looked directly at Amos. They also suggest that you've been influenced by gratitude rather than genuine affection. Elizabeth felt heat flood her cheeks. If you think that's true, perhaps we should wait longer before. Nay. Amos reached across the table and took her hand. Bishop Troyer, I understand that my choice has disappointed some people. But I will not pretend to feelings I don't have, and I will not marry the wrong woman to please others. And you, Miss Beiler? The bishop asked gently. How do you answer concerns that you've used the children's affections to secure your position here? The question stunned, but Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. I came here to work, not to find a husband. Everything that's grown between this family and me has been genuine. I love these children as if I'd borne them myself, and I love Amos for the good man he is, not for what he can provide me. Bishop Troyer studied both their faces for a long moment. What happened during the storm has been reported to me in detail. Henry Yoder, Dr. Mitchell, and others have spoken of Miss Beiler's courage and devotion to the children. She saved Rebecca's life, Amos said quietly. Nursed her for 3 days without help, kept all the children safe and calm while she was terrified herself. I also hear that young Mary spoke clearly to several neighbors yesterday, asking when her new mama would be officially married to her dad. Elizabeth's throat swelled with emotion. Mary's gradual return to normal speech was indeed remarkable. The child now spoke freely with family and trusted friends, though she remained quiet with strangers. The children have flourished under Elizabeth's care, Amos said. They call her Mama because she's earned that title. Bishop Troyer was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing his decision carefully. Finally, he spoke. I will publish your engagement tomorrow at Christmas Eve service. The wedding can take place in February. He paused. However, I must warn you that the Schrock family remains upset. How upset? Elizabeth asked. The bishop's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Anna Schrock is young and has been publicly embarrassed. Her family will forgive that, of course, for that is our way, but it may take a bit more time. That evening, as they prepared for the Christmas Eve service, Elizabeth found herself more nervous than she'd been since arriving in Kansas. Tomorrow would mark the official beginning of their engagement and the community's official reaction to their choice. You're worried, Amos observed, watching her fidget with her hairpins. Shouldn't I be? We're about to face the entire community with news that will upset half of them. Elizabeth. Amos moved behind her chair and rested his hands gently on her shoulders. Do you remember what you told Mary when she was afraid of speaking at school? That some things are worth being brave for? Jaw. Our family is worth being brave for. Our love is worth facing whatever comes. Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow sparkling in the sunlight. Elizabeth dressed carefully in her best navy dress and took extra care with her appearance, knowing she would be scrutinized by everyone at the service. The children were excited about the Christmas program, though Elizabeth noticed Mary growing quiet as they approached the schoolhouse where services were being held. Are you all right, sweetheart? Elizabeth asked, lifting Mary into the buggy. What if people don't want you to be our mama? Elizabeth's heart ached for this sensitive child who worried so much about others. Some people might not understand our choice at first. But the people who truly care about our family want us to be happy. The schoolhouse was packed, with families filling every available seat and children lined up for the Christmas Eve program. Elizabeth immediately felt the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she passed. Anna Schrock sat with her family near the front, her face carefully composed but her eyes cold when they met Elizabeth's. Mrs. Schrock's expression was openly upset, and Elizabeth could see several other women whispering behind their hands. But there were friendly faces too. Henry Yoder and his family nodded encouragingly, and Martha Mast patted the seat she'd saved for Elizabeth beside her. Don't mind the gossips, Martha murmured as Elizabeth sat down. Anyone with eyes can see how happy the children are. The Christmas program proceeded with the usual mix of nervous children and proud parents. Samuel recited his piece about the shepherds with confidence, while Mary surprised everyone by singing a Christmas hymn along with a group of her classmates. "She's never sung alone in public before," someone whispered, and Elizabeth felt a surge of pride for Mary's courage. After the children finished their presentations, Bishop Troyer stood to make his announcements. Elizabeth's heart began to pound as he cleared his throat and looked out over the congregation. "Before we close our service," he began, "I have an engagement to publish. Amos Mast has asked for Elizabeth Beiler as his wife, and she has accepted. They plan to wed in February." The silence that followed was telling. Then whispers began, some surprised, some approving, some clearly disapproving. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn as she sensed the community's mixed reaction to the news. Furthermore, Bishop Troyer continued, raising his voice slightly, "I am sure all of us want to congratulate the blessed couple." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes at this public vindication of her character. The bishop nodded toward her. "The children have flourished under her care, and it is clear that God has blessed this union. I expect the community to welcome Miss Beiler as she deserves." The bishop's words carried the weight of spiritual authority, and Elizabeth could see some of the hostile expressions softening. But Anna Schrock's face remained stony, and Mrs. Schrock looked as if she'd tasted something sour. After the service ended, the response was exactly what Elizabeth had expected, divided. Longtime friends of the Mast family offered congratulations and welcomed her warmly. Several mothers praised her work with Mary, noting how the shy child had blossomed. But the Schrock family and their closest supporters remained pointedly cold, gathering in a cluster and speaking in low, urgent voices while casting disapproving glances in Elizabeth's direction. "Don't let them spoil your happiness," Henry Yoder advised quietly as he prepared to leave. "Anyone who saw what you did during the storm knows you belong with this family." The children seemed oblivious to the adult tensions, excited about Christmas morning and chattering about the day. As they prepared to leave, Mary tugged on Elizabeth's skirt. "Mama, are you sad?" Elizabeth knelt to Mary's level and spoke truthfully. "A little sad, because I don't like when people are unhappy. But mostly I'm grateful for all the people who are happy for us." "I'm happy," Mary said firmly. "And Samuel's happy, and Rebecca's happy, and Dad's happy. That's what matters most." "Ja, sweetheart. That's exactly what matters most." As they drove home through the crisp winter air, Amos was unusually quiet. Elizabeth wondered if he was having second thoughts about the public nature of their announcement. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "Better than all right." Amos glanced at her with a smile. "I'm proud. When Bishop Troyer spoke about your courage and devotion, when he told the community you'd proven yourself as a mother. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. Even though some people are upset? Especially because some people are upset, and we're choosing love anyway." That evening, as they tucked the children into bed on Christmas Eve, Elizabeth marveled at how much her life had changed in just 2 months. "Mama," Samuel said as she kissed him goodnight, "tomorrow when we open presents, will it be the first Christmas of our real family?" Elizabeth looked at this precious boy who had welcomed her so eagerly from the very beginning. "Ja, sweetheart. Tomorrow will be our first official family Christmas." "Good. I have something special to give you." "You do? What is it?" Samuel grinned mysteriously. "It's a surprise. But Dad helped me make it, and it says Mama on it so everyone will know you're really ours now." Later, as Elizabeth and Amos sat by the fire enjoying the quiet of Christmas Eve, she reflected on the day's events. "I was so nervous about the announcement," she admitted. "But now that it's done, I feel settled. Like we've officially claimed each other." "We have," Amos said, reaching for her hand. "And tomorrow we'll celebrate our first Christmas as an engaged couple." Elizabeth looked at the man who had chosen her despite community pressure and social expectations. "I never thought I'd have a Christmas like this, with children excited about gifts, a man who loves me, a real family of my own." "God had this planned all along," Amos said softly. "He just took his timing to bring us together." Outside, snow began to fall gently, adding to the magic of Christmas Eve. Inside, all was warmth and love and the deep contentment that comes from finding your place in the world. Tomorrow would bring Christmas morning, excited children, and the joy of their first holiday as an officially engaged family. But tonight, Elizabeth was simply grateful for love discovered, for children gained, for a future that promised everything she'd ever dreamed of and more than she'd ever dared hope for. The community's mixed reaction no longer mattered. What mattered was the family sleeping peacefully upstairs and the man sitting beside her planning their future together. They had chosen each other, and that choice would be celebrated tomorrow with all the joy that Christmas morning could hold. Chapter 13. Christmas morning dawned with the kind of crystalline beauty that made the Kansas prairie look like a winter wonderland. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering the barnyard and fields in pristine white that sparkled like diamonds in the early sunlight. Elizabeth woke in her little house and hurried to the Mast farm. As she approached the home, she heard the sound of excited voices. The children were clearly awake and eager to begin their Christmas celebration. She had worn her best green dress, the one Amos had said brought out the honey color in her eyes, and she had braided her hair with special care. Today felt different from any Christmas she'd ever experienced, not just because it was her first as an engaged woman, but because it was her first as a true mother. Elizabeth stepped into the main house kitchen to find controlled chaos. Samuel was bouncing with barely contained excitement, Rebecca was banging her spoon against her high chair and babbling happily, and Mary was trying to peek around the corner into the front room where their modest gifts waited. "Mama!" Rebecca called joyfully when she saw Elizabeth, reaching up with both arms. "Good morning, my precious girl," Elizabeth said, lifting the baby for their morning cuddle. "Merry Christmas!" "Mama, can we open presents now?" Samuel asked, practically vibrating with anticipation. "We've been waiting forever." Elizabeth laughed, looking at the kitchen clock that showed barely 7 in the morning. "Forever being about an hour since you woke up?" Amos appeared from the barn, stamping snow from his boots and bringing the scent of cold air and hay. His face lit up when he saw Elizabeth holding Rebecca while Mary clung to her other side. "Merry Christmas," he said warmly, crossing to kiss Elizabeth's cheek, a gesture so natural and right that it made her heart flutter. "Ready for our first Christmas morning as a family?" "More than ready," Elizabeth replied, meaning it completely. They gathered in the front room, where a tiny pile of carefully wrapped gifts waited beneath the evergreen bough Amos had cut and decorated with simple paper ornaments the children had made. It wasn't elaborate, but it was perfect, intimate and warm and filled with love. "Who wants to go first?" Elizabeth asked, settling on the floor with Rebecca on her lap. "Mary should go first," Samuel declared generously. "Because she's the youngest who can open her own present." Mary approached her gift shyly, still not quite believing that this abundance was really for her. She unwrapped the embroidered handkerchief Elizabeth had made, running her fingers over the tiny flowers with wonder. "It's beautiful, Mama," she whispered. "I'll keep it forever." Samuel's excitement reached its peak when he unwrapped the wooden whistle Elizabeth had carved for him. He immediately tried it out, producing a clear, musical note that made Rebecca clap her hands. "It's perfect." "Listen, Dat, it works." Rebecca's gifts were simple but perfect for a toddler: a soft cloth doll Elizabeth had sewn and a set of wooden blocks Amos had cut. The baby hugged her doll tightly and said bopply with great satisfaction. "Now Mama's turn," Samuel announced importantly, retrieving a carefully wrapped package. "This is from all of us, but I made the most important part." Elizabeth unwrapped the gift to find a simple wooden frame that Amos had crafted, containing a piece of cloth on which Samuel had painstakingly embroidered Mama in uneven but determined stitches. "Samuel practiced for weeks," Mary explained proudly. "Dat taught him how to hold the needle." Elizabeth felt tears spring to her eyes as she traced the crooked letters with her finger. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's so everyone knows you're really our Mama now," Samuel said seriously. "Not just working here, but really truly ours." "I am really truly yours," Elizabeth assured him, pulling him close for a hug. "For sure and for certain." "And we're really truly yours too," Mary added, snuggling against Elizabeth's other side. Amos cleared his throat and reached behind the small evergreen branch. "I have something for Mama, too." He handed Elizabeth a rectangular package wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside, she found a beautiful wooden box with her initials EB carved elegantly on the lid. "But wait," Amos said with a smile, "look inside." Elizabeth opened the box to find a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, then gasped at what she saw: a hand-drawn plan for expanding the farmhouse, with detailed sketches showing a larger kitchen, additional bedrooms, and a special sewing room marked Elizabeth's room. "It's our future home," Amos explained. "I wanted you to see what I'm planning for US space for our family to grow, a place that's truly ours together." "Oh, Amos," Elizabeth breathed, studying every carefully drawn line. "It's wonderful. But when would you have time to do all this construction?" "Next summer, after planting season. David and his boys have already agreed to help, and Henry Yoder says he'll lend tools and labor too." Amos moved closer, pointing to different sections of the plan. "See here? A pantry large enough for preserving food for a big family." Elizabeth looked up at him sharply. "A big family?" Amos's cheeks reddened slightly. "Well, if God blesses us with more children, we'll need the space. And if not, we'll have plenty of room for the children we already have to grow and bring friends home." "Dad, does this mean you and Mama might have a baby together?" Samuel asked with the directness of childhood. "Someday, maybe," Amos replied carefully. "But we already have the most wonderful children any parents could want." Mary whispered something to Samuel, who grinned widely. "Mary says she hopes you have a baby girl so she can be a big sister again and teach her things like you taught her." Elizabeth felt her heart overflow with love for these precious children who had accepted her so completely. "Whatever God has planned for our family, I know it will be perfect." As the morning continued, they prepared a special Christmas breakfast together: pancakes made in festive shapes, crispy bacon, and hot chocolate that made the children's eyes shine with delight. The kitchen filled with laughter and chatter as they cooked and ate together, every moment precious in its ordinary magic. "Mama," Rebecca said clearly, pointing to Elizabeth and then to herself. "My mama. Ja, darling. I'm your mama." After breakfast, they bundled up for a walk in the fresh snow, with Amos pulling Rebecca on a small sled he'd made while Samuel and Mary threw snowballs and made snow angels. Elizabeth watched her family play in the winter wonderland, marveling at how naturally they all fit together. "What are you thinking?" Amos asked, joining her as she watched the children play. "I was thinking about how different this Christmas is from any I imagined," Elizabeth replied. 6 months ago, I was caring for dying parents, feeling like life was passing me by. Now I have everything I never dared dream of. Children who love me, a man who chose me not from duty but from love, a real family of my own." Amos pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched their children play. "And I have a woman who loves my children as fiercely as if she'd borne them herself, who brings joy and laughter back to our home, who makes me believe in tomorrow again." As afternoon approached, they returned to the warm house for a Christmas dinner that Elizabeth had spent days planning: roasted chicken with all the trimmings, fresh bread, and preserved vegetables from the garden. But the true centerpiece of the meal was the family gathered around the table. Samuel chattered constantly about his new whistle and his plans for spring projects with his father. Mary spoke more freely than she had since her mother's death, asking questions and sharing observations with growing confidence. Rebecca babbled happily in her high chair, occasionally saying "mama" or "dat" with perfect clarity. "And remember, for dessert, we have the lebkuchen you helped me make," Elizabeth reminded them. "Should we say a special Christmas prayer?" Amos suggested as they prepared to eat. They joined hands around the table, Elizabeth between Amos and Mary, with Samuel holding Rebecca's tiny hand to complete their circle. "God," Amos began, his voice warm with gratitude, "we thank you for this Christmas day, for this food, and most especially for bringing our family together. Thank you for sending Elizabeth to us when we needed her most, for healing our hearts and making us whole again. And thank you for giving me children to love and a man who loves me back," Elizabeth added softly. "And thank you for making Elizabeth our real mama," Samuel piped up. "Amen," Mary whispered, loud and clear. "Amen," Rebecca echoed, making everyone smile. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Hannah Miller. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Hannah Miller, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Hannah Miller Amish romance.